She set her last coin on that counter with steady hands, and the shopkeeper laughed loud enough for every soul in Silver Creek to hear. Abigail Turner did not flinch. She did not weep. She picked that coin back up, turned toward the door, and walked straight into a wall of silence and cruelty she hadn't earned. But nobody in that store saw what was standing just outside the window. Nobody except the one man in this territory who never looked away from the truth. Nee. If this story already has your heart subscribed to this channel, follow every part to the end and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1882 had not been kind to Silver Creek, Colorado. The creek itself was barely a trickle by July, and the dust that rose off the main road coated everything: the storefronts, the horses tied to the hitching posts, the faces of men and women who had stopped to expect from the sky or from each other. It was the kind of heat that made people mean. The kind that settled into bones and burned away patience and generosity until what was left was something harder and uglier than either. Abigail Turner stepped off the noon stage with a battered leather suitcase in one hand and a carefully folded letter in the other. She was 29 years old. She wore a cotton dress the color of a faded morning sky, a cream-colored apron tied over it that she hadn't had time to remove before boarding, and boots that had been resoled twice and were asking for a third time. Her hair, a deep chestnut brown, was pinned back at the base of her neck, not from vanity, but from practicality. Everything about Abigail Turner was practical. She hadn't had the luxury of being anything else. The letter in her hand was from a woman named Mrs. Clara Boone, who ran the only seamstress shop in Silver Creek and had advertised in the Denver paper for a skilled hand. Abigail had answered that advertisement 6 weeks ago. She had received a reply 2 weeks later, and she had spent the remaining 4 weeks carefully arranging her affairs in Pueblo, packing what little she owned, and traveling the long, hot miles between her old life and what she hoped would be a new one. She was not naive. She knew that new beginnings were not free. They cost something, usually the thing you could least afford to give. But she had given everything she a life in Pueblo that had given her almost nothing back, and so she figured the exchange rate couldn't get much worse. She was wrong about that. She found the seamstress shop on the west end of the main street. A hand-painted sign hung over the door. The window was dark. The door, when she tried it, was locked. A woman sweeping the boardwalk next door looked up. "Looking for Clara Boone?" she asked. "I am," Abigail said. "I have a letter from her. I was expected." The woman stopped sweeping. Her expression shifted not to sympathy, but to something else. Something that contained just enough pity to be its own kind of cruelty. "Yes," the woman said. 3 weeks ago. Fever took her fast." Abigail stood very still. "Her husband sold the shop 2 days after the burial," the woman continued. "Harlan Price. He runs the dry goods. He's converting it to storage." "I see," Abigail said. "You come a long way for nothing, sounds like." "I came a long way," Abigail agreed. "The nothing part I'll sort out." She thanked the woman and walked back toward the center of town. She was not panicking. She had learned a long time ago that panic was expensive and rarely produced anything useful. What she had was a suitcase, $17.40, a set of skills that were genuine, and the ability to hold her spine straight even when everything in her wanted to fold. She went to the general store first, not Price's Dry Goods, which she was already forming opinions about, but Callaway's Mercantile, a broader establishment on the north side of the street. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. It smelled of leather and soap and coffee, and the particular kind of closed-in warmth that general stores in summer towns always carry. There were 4 people in the store, 2 men at the counter examining bolts of rope, a woman in a yellow dress browsing a display of ribbon, and behind the counter, a broad-shouldered man with a waxed mustache and an expression of considerable self-satisfaction. That was Eldon Callaway. Abigail approached the counter. "Afternoon," she said. "My name is Abigail Turner. I arrived today from Pueblo. I had work arranged with Clara Boone, but I understand she's passed." I'm a seamstress and a skilled hand with alterations. I was hoping you might know of anyone in town who has need of that kind of work, or might point me toward lodging while I arrange my situation." Calloway looked at her. It was not a friendly look. It was the kind of look that weighs a person for what they're worth and finds the number disappointing. "You the woman who answered that advertisement out of Denver?" he asked. "I am." He leaned on the counter. "We heard about you." That was not a good beginning. "What exactly did you hear?" she asked. "Clara Boone's husband mentioned it. Said a woman from Pueblo was coming. Said you'd had some trouble back there. Word gets around." He smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. "A small town, Miss Turner. People talk." "I'm sure they do," she said evenly. "Though I'd be curious to know what kind of trouble they've been discussing, since I'm not aware of any I've caused." "There was a fire," Calloway said. The two men at the rope display had stopped examining rope. "There was a fire," Abigail confirmed, "at the boarding house where I lived. 3 years ago, no one was hurt. The cause was determined to be a faulty lamp in the kitchen. Some folks say different. Some folks," she said, "are wrong." "Nay." Calloway straightened up. He was enjoying this. She could see it in the way he settled back into his weight, comfortable, like a man who knows the room is already arranged in his favor. "Be that as it may," he said, "I don't know of any work for you here. And as for lodging, Mrs. Hatch runs the boarding house on the 2nd Street. You could try her." She thanked him, not because she felt thankful, and left. Mrs. Hatch took one look at her and folded her arms across her chest. "I heard the stage came in," she said. "You're the one from Pueblo." "I am. I don't have rooms available." Abigail looked at the sign in the window. "Rooms for rent," it said, with no qualification. "The sign suggests otherwise," she said. "It's sold," Mrs. Hatch said. "I keep meaning to take it down." "A clean tenant," Abigail said. "Quiet. I can pay 2 weeks in advance." "It's not about the money." "Then what is it about?" Mrs. Hatch met her eyes with something that was almost but not quite guilt. "I run a respectable house, Miss Turner. I have a reputation to consider." "As do I," Abigail said, "or I'm trying to. Then I suggest you try somewhere else." She tried 2 more establishments. The result was the same. Nay. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Abigail Turner was standing in the middle of Silver Creek's Main Street with her suitcase at her feet and $17.40 in her pocket and no particular place to go. The heat pressed down on her shoulders like something physical. Dust from a passing wagon settled on her dress. Around her, the town to went about its business, and she was already invisible, already the kind of problem that a place decides to simply not acknowledge. She did not sit down on her suitcase and weep. She had already decided she wasn't going to do that. What she did was walk back to Calloway's Mercantile. She needed supplies at a minimum, a few practical items. She had money enough for food and basic necessities, and she would figure out the lodging situation after she had eaten something. Because she had not eaten since early morning, and she was beginning to notice it in the way that a person notices a slow leak, not with alarm, but with a growing certainty that something needs to be addressed. She pushed open the door. There were more people now. 5, 6, perhaps 7. Silver Creek was a small town, and the general store in the late afternoon was something of a gathering place. Which meant that when Abigail Turner walked in with her suitcase and her spine straight and her expression containing nothing she was not prepared to defend, she walked into an audience. The counter. She placed a few items down, a small tin of crackers, a piece of cheese wrapped in cloth, a box of matches. She set her coin on the counter. Eldon Calloway looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he laughed. It was a short laugh, but it was a loud one, and it was shaped exactly the way that laughs are shaped when they are meant to carry, when they are meant to land. Half the store heard it, and turned, and the other half turned, because the first half had. "What exactly," he said, "were you planning to buy with that?" She had put down a $50. The items she had placed on the counter came to 35 cents. "Those 3 things," she said. A $50. He held it up, and there was something theatrical about the gesture, something performed for the room. I had a woman come in last week, trying to pay with a button. At least a button's interesting. Someone in the store laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It's legal currency, she said. It's barely enough for crackers. He set the coin down and pushed two of the items back toward her. You can have the crackers. The rest you'll have to do without.
Wait, sure.
She looked at him steadily. The total is 35 cents. The coin covers it. My prices went up this morning. The lie was so bare she almost admired it. When exactly this morning, she said. Early, he said. You can check the board if you like. It's my store, Miss Turner. I set the prices. There were perhaps 8 people watching now. A few of them were smiling. Not from cruelty, exactly, or not only from cruelty, but from the particular comfort of watching someone else be the object of a small humiliation, because it meant it wasn't them. I'll pay the original price, Aiden, she said, or you can keep all of it, and I'll take my business elsewhere. Isn't anywhere else, he said. Not in this town. Not for you. A man in the back said, maybe the mountain'll take her. It takes everything else. That drew a genuine laugh. Abigail picked up her coin. She picked up her suitcase. She turned toward the door with her jaw set and her hands absolutely steady, because she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing anything else. It was nearly to the door when it opened. The light that came in was afternoon light, thick and golden and full of suspended dust. And then the light was blocked by the shape of a man. A large shape, taller than the doorframe by an inch, broader than it by considerably more. He had to dip his head slightly to enter, which he did without appearing to notice, the way a man moves through a space he's navigated enough times that his body has simply accounted for it. He was not young, but he was not old. Somewhere in the long middle of a life that had been lived hard and outside. His hair was dark and somewhat long, past the collar of a vest that was as worn as old saddle leather. He had a beard that was not kept, but was not unkempt, it was simply there, the beard of a man who had other things to think about. His hands, which hung at his sides in no particular hurry, were very large and very still. He looked at Abigail Turner. She had stopped walking, because the door was now occupied. He looked past her toward the counter, and something in his face went very quiet. Quieter than it already was, which was considerable. Nathan, Calloway said, with a different tone than the one he'd been using. Didn't hear you ride in. I reckon you were busy, Nathan Cole said. His voice was low, not loud, not projecting, not performed for the room. Simply arrived. He looked back at Abigail. He looked at the coin in her hand. He looked at the suitcase. He looked at her face, which she had arranged into an expression that gave nothing away, because she had been practicing that expression for several years and had gotten quite good at it. Are you leaving? He asked. That appears to be the situation. Yes, she said. Against your will? She paused. I don't know that I'd characterize it. Calloway, Nathan said, and he looked over her head at the man behind the counter. What did she come in for? That's between me and... What did she come in for? It was still not loud. The quality of it had changed, the way weather changes not dramatically, but in a way that the body understands before the mind catches up. Calloway shifted his weight, crackers, cheese, matches. And she had money, $50, which covers what she wanted. My prices. I know your prices, Eldon, Nathan said. I've been buying from this store for 11 years. Bring her out. The store was very quiet. Calloway's jaw worked for a moment. Then he reached under the counter, retrieved the cheese and the matches, and placed them back on the counter beside crackers section. 35 cents, he said to Abigail. There was no inflection in it whatsoever. Abigail set the coin on the counter. She gathered her items. She turned back toward the door, where Nathan Cole was still standing. He stepped aside to let her out. He held the door. Walked past him and out into the afternoon heat, and she heard the door close behind her, and then she heard it open again immediately, which meant he had followed her out. She turned. He was standing 2 feet away from her on the boardwalk. Up close, he was even larger than the doorframe had suggested. He held his hat in both hands, turning the brim slowly, which she would come to understand was his version of searching for words. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" he asked. "I'm working on that," she said. "Mrs. Hatch turn you away?" She looked at him. "You know about that already." "Small town, so I've been told." He turned the hat brim again. "Dunmore's saloon sometimes rents the back room. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and it's private. You'd want to ask for Jim Dunmore, not the bar staff. Tell him Nathan Cole sent you." "Is that your name?" "It is. And why would your name carry any weight with Mr. Dunmore?" "We've done business," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who accepted assistance from strangers without considering what the acceptance would cost her. She had learned that lesson the hard way, as most women in her situation learned most lessons. "What do you want for this information, Mr. Cole?" she asked. He looked almost surprised, as if the question had not occurred to him, or as if it had occurred to him and he'd already dismissed it for reasons that seemed obvious to him and that he had not thought to explain. "Nothing," he said. "There's no transaction here, ma'am. I'm just telling you where you can sleep tonight." She studied him. "People in this town seem to know my name and my history before I've had a chance to introduce myself." "I know your name," he said. "Nathan Cole's all I can offer in return." "And the history?" He turned the hat brim one more time. "I expect if your history mattered, you'd have told it to me yourself." Something shifted very slightly in Abigail Turner's chest. She did not allow it to show on her face. "Dunmore's saloon," she said. "Entrance on the alley side. Jim'll be in his office this time of day." Uttered once. She picked up her suitcase. "Thank you, Mr. Noel." "Ma'am," she walked. She did not look back. But she was aware, in the particular way that a person is aware of something standing behind them that is not a threat, that he was watching until she was out of sight. Jim Dunmore was a compact, careful man who wore suspenders over a collarless shirt and kept his office in a state of organized disorder that somehow functioned perfectly. Abigail appeared in his doorway and said Nathan had sent her. He looked up from his ledger with an expression that recalibrated itself several times in quick succession. "Neil sent you," he repeated. "He did. Huh." He set down his pen. "Nathan doesn't send people to me, generally. He doesn't send people anywhere, generally." "I made an exception," she said. Dunmore looked at her suitcase. "How long?" "A week to start. I can pay $2 a week," he said. "Meals not included, but you can use the kitchen before 7 in the morning." "Yeah. You'll want to be out of the back hallway by 8, because that's when deliveries come through. There's a bolt on the inside of the door. You use it." "Every night. Without exception," he said. "It's a saloon. I run a tight place, but it's still a saloon." "Understood," she said. $2 a week." She laid $2 on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You eaten today?" "Not recently," she said. He opened the door to the hallway and called down it, "Rosa." "Whatever's on the stove. Extra plate." He turned back to Abigail with the air of a man who has settled the matter and moved on. "Room's at the end of the hall," he said. "Second door on the left. Don't mind the noise after 9. You'll get used to it." She would not get used to it. But that was a problem for later, and right now later was a gift she was deeply grateful to have. She found work on the third day. Not through referrals, and not through the goodwill of the town. She found it the way she found most things in her life, by refusing to accept that the finding was finished. It had begun, on her second morning in Silver Creek, to simply walk. She covered the town in a methodical grid. Noting which establishments had mending she could identify from the outside a fraying awning, a tablecloth visible through a restaurant window that had a split seam along one edge, and then going in and making her offer in the most direct terms possible. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was identifying a problem and proposing a specific solution at a specific price. Most doors closed, but not all of them. Dr. Walter Henney, who ran the only medical practice in Silver Creek, had a pile of surgical linen that needed repairing, and his hands were too large and too imprecise for the fine needlework required. He hired her at 30 cents per piece. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. The schoolteacher, a young woman named Louisa Marsh, who had arrived in Silver Creek only the previous autumn and therefore occupied roughly the same social standing as Abigail, had a collection of damaged books that needed rebinding. They were not strictly sewing work, but Abigail's fingers were clever, and she had done bookbinding before, and Louisa Marsh paid her fairly and without apology. By the end of the first week, she had established herself as a person who was willing to do good work for honest pay, and a small and cautious circle of Silver Creek's residents had begun to notice. A smaller, less cautious circle had also begun to talk. She heard it in pieces, from Dunmore, who was careful but honest. From Rosa, his cook, who was direct in the way that only people who have already decided not to care what you think of them can be direct. "They're saying you came here under false pretenses," Rosa told her one morning. Over a breakfast Abigail had begun helping to prepare in exchange for having it earlier and hotter. "That you knew Clara Boone was dead before you left Pueblo." "That's not true," Abigail said. "I know it ain't," Rosa said. "I'm telling you what they're saying." "Who's saying it?" "Rice," Rosa said. "Harlan Price. He's the one who bought Clara's shop, and he doesn't want competition. He's spreading it around that you came here to cheat your way into a business before he could close the deal." Abigail set down her coffee cup very carefully. "That's a specific lie." "Yes, it is," Rosa said, "and it's doing its job. Why would Price care about me? I have no shop. I have no capital. I am a woman living in the back room of a saloon with 30 cents worth of surgical linen repair to my name." "Because you're good," Rosa said simply. "Because people who've seen your work are talking about it. Because a woman who can actually sew is a threat to a man who's already decided what the sewing business in this town should look like." Abigail thought about that. "What's Price's actual business?" she asked. "Everything," Rosa said. "Land commerce. He's the one who owns the west claim on the silver mine. He's on the town council. He lends money to people who need it, and then he finds reasons why they can't pay it back." She paused. "He's been after Nathan Cole's land for 3 years." "Nathan Cole," Abigail said. It was the second time she had heard that name. "Mountain above town," Rosa said. "Cole's been up there 11 years. Has a piece of land that sits right along the water access for the lower valley. Price wants that access. He's been trying to buy it, scare it, and argue it, and law it away from Cole for 3 years, and Cole won't budge." "Mr. Cole helped me," Abigail said, "the first day." Rosa looked at her. "Yes, I heard that. What kind of man is he?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. She was not a woman who spoke carelessly, and Abigail had begun to understand that the pauses were where Rosa was choosing accuracy over convenience. "He's a man who keeps to himself," Rosa finally said. "And not because he's unfriendly. Because he's been taught that the world is more peaceful when he's not in it. He lost his family 11 years ago, his wife, a baby that came early and didn't stay. He buried them both in the same week, and then he went up that mountain, and he stayed." Abigail said nothing. "He comes to town for supplies," Rosa said. "Maybe once every 2-3 weeks. He doesn't talk much. He pays fair. He's never caused trouble in the 11 years he's been here." She paused again. "The town is afraid of him because he's big and he's quiet and he lives alone on a mountain, and people are afraid of what they can't file into a category they already know. That's the whole of it." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "He told me the fire in Pueblo wasn't something he needed to know about." "I'm not surprised," Rosa said. "He wouldn't ask. He'd figure if it mattered, you'd say so." "That's exactly what he said." Rosa looked at her. Nay. Her expression was not quite readable, but it contained something, a kind of measuring attention. "He's never done anything like that before. Not that I've seen." "Like what?" "Stepped in for a stranger, told Calloway to ring her out." Abigail looked at her coffee. "He was simply being decent." Rosa said. "He was." The way she said it implied that being simply decent in Silver Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1882 was a rarer and more remarkable act than Abigail Turner had given it credit for. On the 10th day, she saw Nathan Cole again. 80. She was sitting outside Dr. Henny's office, in the narrow strip of shade along the east side of the building, taking advantage of the mid-morning cool before the day became serious about its heat. She was mending a complicated tier in a heavy canvas apron, the kind worn by the miners who worked the silver claim, and she was working quickly and precisely, which was how she worked everything. Heard the horse before she saw him. It was a dark gray horse, large and well kept, with the kind of easy movement that spoke to years of consistent care. Nathan Cole rode it with the particular unhurried quality of a man who has nowhere to be except exactly where he is. He was wearing the same worn leather vest. His hat, which he had held in his hands when speaking to her before, was on his head now, pulled low against the sun. He saw her, he slowed the horse, he touched the brim of his hat. It was a small gesture, not a tip, exactly not the theatrical gesture she had seen other men make at women they wanted to impress. It was something quieter than that, an acknowledgement, a recognition. She nodded back, he rode on. She watched him until he turned the corner of the main street. She was not a woman who made much of small moments. But she found herself noticing this one, the way it sat, unhurried, in the middle of an otherwise difficult morning. The way it asked nothing of her. The way it cost him nothing to offer. She went back to the canvas apron and the complicated tier, and she finished it in another 12 minutes, and it was as good a piece of mending as she had done in a long time. The trouble with Price declared itself on the 14th day. He had been expecting something. Rosa had warned her, and Abigail had learned to trust Rosa's read on the town. But she had not expected it to come in the form of a man in a suit. Harlan Price was not what she had pictured. She had pictured someone large and overtly menacing. What she got was a man of medium height with excellent posture, and a suit that had been made somewhere considerably more sophisticated than Silver Creek. He had the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time, and was beginning to understand it wouldn't be forever, and hadn't made peace with that yet. His hair was combed with precision. His shoes were clean despite the dust of the main street. He came to Jim Dunmore's back entrance at 11 in the morning, and Rosa found Abigail in the kitchen and told her, and Abigail dried her hands and went out. Price looked her over in the manner of a man assessing an investment and calculating depreciation. "Miss Turner," he said, "I thought it was time we had a conversation." "You could have come during business hours," she said. "This is my business hours," he said pleasantly. "I keep my own schedule." "What can I do for you, Mr. Price?" "I think the question," he said, "is what you can do for yourself." He clasped his hands in front of him. It was a practiced gesture. She had seen it before the person who frames the threat as concern. "You're in a difficult position. No permanent lodging. Work that's informal and likely to dry up. A reputation in this town that, whatever its origins, is not working in your favor." "I appreciate the summary," she said. "I can change all of that," he said. "I have a position available. Administrative, keeping records, managing correspondence. It pays well. It would give you a stable income and a reason for the town to see you differently." She looked at him. "And what would I be doing exactly to earn that?" "I described," he said. "For whom?" "For my operations." "Me." "Which include," Eden, she said, "lending money at rates that make repayment difficult, and pursuing land that belongs to people who won't sell it." The pleasantness didn't leave his face exactly. It rearranged itself. "You've been talking to the wrong people," he said. "Nan." "I've been listening to the people who talk to me," she said. Which is what a person does when she's trying to understand her situation. "Your situation," he said, "is that you have no allies in this town. No connections, no history. The people who might have been inclined to help you have been persuaded otherwise." He paused. "I can change that also. By employing you." She looked at him steadily. She took her time with it, because she wanted to be certain of what she was about to say, and she wanted to be equally certain that he understood she had taken her time with it. "No," she said, his expression cooled by several degrees. "That's a short answer for a large decision. It covers the ground," she said. "You're making an error," he said. "A significant one. Town follows my lead, Miss Turner. It has for 15 years. You want to continue living in a saloon back room, doing piecework for a doctor who barely has enough patience to keep himself occupied, and being laughed at in Calloway's store. I've been laughed at before, she said. I'm still here. He was quiet for a moment. The pleasantness was entirely gone now. I'll give you a week to reconsider, he said. I won't need it, she said. Left. Rosa appeared in the doorway behind her. That was either very brave, she said, or very... Abigail said. Right, Rosa said. They went back inside. She told herself it didn't matter. She had faced worse than Harlan Price and survived it, and she was not without resources. Nay, she was good at her work, and she was not afraid of difficulty, and she had enough money to sustain herself for several more weeks if she was careful. But she was also honest enough with herself, in the quiet of the back room with the bolt thrown and the buzz of the saloon filtering in through the wall, to acknowledge that she was in a more exposed position than she liked. She thought about what Rosa had said, about Nathan Cole's land along the water access, about Price's 3-year campaign to take it, about the way Nathan Cole had walked into Calloway's store and said ring her out without raising his voice and without needing to. She thought about the touch of the hat brim on the dusty street. Nay, she thought about a man who had been on a mountain for 11 years because the world had taken everything from him and he had decided it was more peaceful that way. She did not make anything of these thoughts. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not make things of isolated thoughts. But she held them, for a moment, in the quiet of the room, before sleep found her and took her somewhere the noise of the saloon couldn't reach. Outside Silver Creek, above the valley, the mountain sat in the dark, the way it always sat, patient, enormous, indifferent to the smallness of the dramas below it. In the cabin at its shoulder, a lamp was still lit, and Nathan Cole was sitting at his table, turning his hat brim slowly in his hands, looking at nothing in particular, in the way that a man looks when something has gotten into his thoughts and refuses to be walked out. Nathan Cole did not sleep well that night. He sat at the table until the lamp burned low, and then he trimmed the wick and sat in the near dark for another hour, listening to the mountain settle around him, the way it did in summer the dry creak of timber, the distant movement of something large in the tree line, the wind coming off the ridge in long slow pulls that meant tomorrow would be hotter than today. He knew the sounds of this place the way he knew his own breathing. He had mapped them, in 11 years of solitary nights, until they were less a landscape and more a language he had learned to read without thinking. But tonight the sounds weren't doing their usual work of emptying his mind. He kept coming back to the woman in the doorway of Calloway's store. The way she had set that coin down, the way she had picked it back up. The way she had turned toward the door with her spine straight and her face composed into something that looked like calm, but was in fact something harder and more deliberate, something that had been built, not born. He recognized it because he had built something similar himself. The structure a person constructs when they have decided, at some specific point in life, that they will not give the watching world the satisfaction of seeing them break. He had not intended to do anything when he walked into Calloway's that afternoon. He had come in for flour and a new coil of rope and had expected to be in and out in 7 minutes. He had not walk into the middle of what Eldon Calloway called hospitality, and any honest man would call something else entirely. He had not calculated the decision to intervene. It had not been a decision at all, in the way that most of what he did was not so much decided as simply done the body ahead of the mind, the action already in motion before thought had a chance to second-guess it. What surprised him, sitting in the near dark with the lamp burning low, was not what he had done. It was what he had said afterward. The question he had asked her on the boardwalk. The words that had come out of him, before he had properly organized them. You got somewhere to go tonight? He couldn't remember the last time he had asked a stranger a question that personal. He couldn't remember the last time he had cared about the answer. He went to bed eventually, but sleep took its time arriving, And when it did, it was shallow and restless, and when morning came, he was already at the corral before the sun had cleared the ridge, working the fence line with his hands, because his hands always knew what to do even when the rest of him didn't. He thought about her name, Abigail Turner. He thought about the way she had asked him what he wanted for the information directly, without apology, as if she was accustomed to everything having a price and was simply doing the accounting ahead of time. He thought about the look on her face when he had told her there was no transaction. Like she didn't quite believe him, but was willing to provisionally accept it until she had evidence otherwise. He drove a fence post into the summer ground with 3 clean strikes and moved to the next one. He told himself it was none of his business. He told himself that 11 times over the course of the morning, which was about 9 more times than something that was genuinely none of his business required. On the 16th day, the trouble came for Abigail in a different shape. She was walking back from Dr. Henny's office, with a bundle of finished surgical linen tucked under her arm and the payment for it in her pocket, which gave her a feeling of solidity. She had come to recognize and value the particular weight of money earned by specific work done well. It was a modest amount. It was hers. She was halfway down the main street when 2 men fell into step beside her. Not threatening, exactly not openly. They didn't touch her. Men. They didn't raise their voices. But they positioned themselves in a way that compressed her space, that moved her slightly off the center of the boardwalk and toward the edge of it, which was a technique she recognized and which made her blood go very quiet, in the particular way it went quiet when she was deciding how to handle something. "Miss Turner," said the one on her left. He was lean and sharp-featured, with a vest that was too new for the rest of him. "Mr. Price asked me to check in on you, see if you'd given any more thought to his offer." "I have," she said, not slowing. "The answer is still no." "That's unfortunate," he said. They kept pace with her easily. "He was hoping you'd come around. He's a patient man, Mr. Price, but his patience has a shape to it. It's not indefinite." "Most things aren't," she said. "You've been doing a bit of work around town," the other man said. He was broader, quieter, with the particular stillness of a man who spoke infrequently because he was accustomed to not being the one who needed to. "Piecework here and there. Smart of you. Practical." "Thank you," she said flatly. "The thing about piecework," the lean one said, "is that it depends on the goodwill of whoever's hiring. And goodwill in a town like Silver Creek is, well, it moves around. Follows the current, you might say. And Mr. Price sets a lot of the current." She stopped walking. They stopped with her. She turned and faced the lean one, because he was the talker, and the talker was always the point. "Are you threatening me?" she said, "or are you simply very bad at weather metaphors?" And flickered in his face. Not quite anger, more like recalculation. "We're offering friendly advice," he said. "I have a full calendar of friendly advice at the moment," she said. I'll let you know when there's room. Good afternoon." She walked away from them, and she did not look back, and her hands were perfectly steady, and her heart was hitting the inside of her chest like it was trying to exit the conversation faster than she was. She made it to the end of the block. She turned the corner. She leaned against the back wall of the dry goods building in the narrow alley shade and stood there for 30 seconds, breathing carefully, the bundle of surgical linen pressed to her chest like it was a shield. 30 seconds was all she allowed herself. Then she straightened up, shifted the bundle, and walked on. She did not go back to Dunmore's. She went, instead, to the schoolhouse at the edge of town, where Louisa Marsh was sitting on the front step eating a biscuit in the aggressiveness of someone who had had a difficult morning and was making the biscuit answer for it. Louisa looked up. She took in Abigail's face, which Abigail was doing her best to keep neutral. "Aiton," she said. Abigail sat down beside her. "How did you know?" "Because you look like someone who has just been politely threatened and is annoyed about it," Louisa said. "He sent someone to see me last spring. About the school curriculum, apparently." "Which was not about the school curriculum. What did you do?" "I told him the curriculum was determined by the school board, which I was not on, and that if he had concerns he should attend the next meeting." Louisa took a deliberate bite of biscuit. He didn't come to the meeting. He doesn't like situations where he can't control the room. What happened after? Two families pulled their children out for a month, Louisa said. Then they put them back. He couldn't sustain the pressure on something that abstract. He needs leverage, and the school didn't give him any. She looked at Abigail sideways. You're different. You need income. That's real leverage. I'm aware, Abigail said. You could consider his offer, Louisa said without inflection. I could also leave, Abigail said. You could, Louisa agreed. Are you going to? Abigail looked at the street. Dust. The heat rising off it in slow waves. The false fronts of the buildings with their painted promises. The flag over the assay office hanging limp in the breathless air. No, she said. Louisa nodded as if this was the answer she had expected and the answer she preferred. Then you need someone in this town who has more currency than price, she said. Not many candidates for that. How many? Louisa was quiet for a moment. Looked at her. Cole, Louisa said simply. Nathan Cole. Price has been trying to break that man for 3 years and has gotten exactly nowhere. And the reason he's gotten nowhere is that Cole doesn't need anything from this town. He doesn't need their approval, or their business, or their opinion. He has his land and his water and 11 years of knowing how to be alone, and there is genuinely nothing Price can take from him. She paused. He's the only person in Silver Creek that Harlan Price actually respects. Which means he's afraid of him. I barely know the man, Abigail said. I know, Louisa said. But he did something for you that he's never done for anyone in this town. And I don't think that was an accident. Abigail said nothing. I'm not telling you what to do, Louisa said. I'm telling you what I observe. What you do with it is your own business. She finished the biscuit. Do you want half of this? I already ate the other half, but there's another one inside. Yes, Abigail said. Actually, yes. She did not go looking for Nathan Cole. She was not built for that kind of approach, and she respected herself too much to manufacture a reason to seek out a man who had been decent to her once and turn it into something she could use. That was Price's logic, and she refused to borrow it. But Silver Creek was a small town, and the summer had a rhythm to it, and on the 18th day Nathan Cole rode in for supplies and the small town arranged the rest. She was outside the telegraph office when he came up the main street. She had just sent a wire to a contact in Denver, a woman she had worked with briefly 2 years ago who had her own shop and sometimes took on work when orders exceeded her capacity. It was a long shot, but Abigail had learned that long shots were only embarrassing if you were ashamed of needing to take them, and she wasn't. She saw him before he saw her. He was riding the gray horse, moving with that unhurried quality, and he had pushed the brim of his hat up slightly. Which meant he was looking for something, or someone specific, though she couldn't have explained how she knew that from a hat brim. He spotted her. He slowed the horse. He swung down from the saddle in one clean motion and wrapped the reins loosely around the hitching post and walked over to her, hat in hand. Miss Turner, he said, Mr. Cole. You're still here, he said. It was not a challenge. It was an observation with something underneath it, something that might in another man have been relief. I'm still here, she confirmed. He turned the hat brim. She had noticed by now that he did this when he was organizing words. That the rotation of the brim was his version of a pause. I heard Price's men spoke to you, he said. She looked at him. It still gets around. It does. He met her eyes directly, with a steadiness that she had decided, in the past 18 days, it was one of the most restful things about him. He didn't look at her sideways, or over her shoulder, or at a point slightly to the left of her face. You holding all right? I am, she said. He's going to come at it differently next time, Nathan said. He does that. Price doesn't repeat a method that didn't work. I assumed as much. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The hat turned in his hands. I've got a fence line that's down on the north pasture. I've been putting it off because I've had the water diversion to deal with, and the roof on the supply shed. It needs doing before autumn or I'll lose the whole north section. He paused. I can't pay much. But I've got a cabin that has a second room, and I'm a better cook than I look, and you'd be safer on the mountain than you are on the main street of Silver Creek right now." The world arranged itself into a particular kind of silence around that offer. She looked at him very carefully. "You're proposing that I come and live on your mountain?" "In the second room," he said, "with a door that locks." "I'd be in the main room. There's 30 feet of hallway between." "And in exchange?" "Whatever work you find to do," he said. "I'm not asking for service. I'm asking for company, I suppose, though I don't know that I'd be much at it. And I'm telling you that Price won't follow you up the mountain, because he knows better than to come onto my land." "Why does he know better?" Nathan held her gaze. "Because I told him 3 years ago what would happen if he did." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not rush her. He did not add arguments. He turned the hat brim once and waited. "Don't know me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "What do you know?" "I know you picked that coin back up off Calloway's counter without flinching," he said. "Aunt, I know you told Price's man no on the street and walked away from it straight." "Men, I know you've been working every angle you have for 18 days in a town that's been put against you, and you haven't left, and you haven't asked anyone for anything you didn't earn." He paused. "That's enough for me." She stood with that for a moment. "Anne, I have a commission that requires a sewing machine," she said finally. "Or at minimum a good set of fixed shears and a table that doesn't wobble." "Add a table," he said, "and I can get shears." "Road up the mountain," she said. "Can I bring the suitcase on horseback? Or—" "Nah. I'll come for you in the morning with the wagon," he said. 7 o'clock. She looked at him. This large, quiet, careful man who had stepped into a doorway 11 days ago and changed the course of something without apparently meaning to, or at least without appearing to mean to, which in her experience amounted to the same thing. 7 o'clock, she said. He touched the brim of his hat. He went back to his horse. Jing. She watched him right away, and this time when he turned the corner, she turned back toward Dunmore's to go tell Rosa and pack her things, and she did not think too carefully about what she had just agreed to. Because thinking too carefully about it might cause her to undo it, and she had learned by now to trust the decisions she made when her practical mind and some quieter, deeper instinct arrived at the same answer simultaneously. Had opinions. A mountain, Rosa said. His property is on a mountain, yes. Alone. There are 2 rooms, Abigail said. The hallway. Rosa crossed her arms. She was looking at Abigail with an expression that contained several layers of concern, affection, and the particular pragmatism of a woman who had seen enough to know that most risks were real, and a few of them were worth taking. He's a good man, Rosa said finally. I know, Abigail said. Town is going to talk. The town talks regardless of what I do, Abigail said. They've been talking since I stepped off the stage. At least this way there's a door that locks and the table doesn't wobble. Rosa uncrossed her arms. Take the extra blanket from the shelf in your room, she said. It gets cold up there, even in August. The nights drop fast. Thank you, Rosa. And if he does one thing that makes you uncomfortable, Rosa said, straight back down, and I will personally go up that mountain and make him regret his choices. Abigail smiled for what felt like the first time in several days. I believe you. Good, Rosa said, because I mean it. He was there at 7, not at 7, approximately, or 7 when he got around to it, but 7 exactly. She had been watching the clock behind Dunmore's bar, which Rosa had confirmed was accurate. And at 7 o'clock she heard the wagon on the side street and went to the back door with her suitcase and her bundle of work and the extra blanket from the shelf, and he was there. He got down from the wagon when he saw her. He took the suitcase without being asked, not in a way that suggested she couldn't carry it herself, but in the way of a man who is accustomed to the physical management of things and does it naturally, without making an event of it. He said. Good morning, she said. Put the suitcase in the wagon bed. He offered a hand to help her up to the seat. She took it, because the wagon seat was high and the offer was practical. His hand was very large and completely dry, despite the morning heat that was already building, and the grip was steady, and then immediately gone, the hand extended to be useful, and then to return to its owner without lingering. They drove out of Silver Creek in the early morning, and neither of them spoke for the first mile or so, which suited them both. A road up the mountain was not a road exactly, it was a track, wide enough for the wagon but insisting on attention. He drove it with the ease of someone who has driven it hundreds of times in all conditions. The horse, a dun-colored working animal, not the gray she'd seen him ride, moved steadily and without complaint. "Tell me about the fence," she said, "somewhere around the second mile." He glanced at her sideways, not with surprise exactly, but with a quality of attention that suggested he hadn't expected the question and found it acceptable. "North pasture runs along the ridge line," he said. "I've got 12 horses. Used to have 23, but I sold off the young stock last autumn." The fence on the north boundary has 3 sections down after the freeze last winter. I've got the posts cut and ready. It's the stringing and the anchoring that takes 2 pairs of hands. "I can do physical work," she said. "I expect you can," he said. "I'm not purely decorative," she said. "If I'm going to be on your land, I'll pull my weight." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think otherwise." Some people would have. Some people don't think clearly," he said. The mountain opened around them as they climbed. The heat of the valley fell back by degrees, and the air took on the particular quality of altitude, thinner, cleaner, with the smell of pine resin and dry grass and the particular mineral sharpness of rock that has been in the sun all morning. She saw the cabin when they came around the upper bend of the track. It was larger than she had pictured. Built from the mountain's own timber, dark with age and weather, it sat solidly against the slope as if it had grown there rather than been constructed. A broad covered porch wrapped around 2 sides. The barn and corral were set back and to the left. There was a kitchen garden along the south wall. She could see it from the wagon, orderly rows of something green that was doing well despite the dry summer, which meant he was irrigating it. Which meant the water access Price wanted was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. She took it in without comment. He pulled the wagon up in front of the barn, set the brake, and climbed down. She climbed down on her own side. He showed her the second room. It was simple and clean, properly made with a worn quilt in faded blues. A small table, a hook on the wall for clothes, a window that looked south, toward the valley below, and you could see Silver Creek from it, small and distant and manageable from up here, which struck her as appropriate. There was a door, as he had said. The lock was a simple sliding bolt, and he had oiled it recently, which she noticed, because it moved without any sound at all, and a bolt that is not looked after does not move like that. I want to say something," he said, from the doorway. She turned. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "for being here." "I want that said plain, so there's no confusion between us later." Looked at him. "I appreciate plain," she said. "I figured. Then I'll say something plain in return," she said. I don't accept charity. I'll work for the room and the meals, and I'll keep my accounts honest. And if at any point this arrangement stops working for either of us, I'd rather hear it directly than sideways." "Agreed," he said immediately. "And I won't ask you questions you don't want to answer," she said, "and I'd ask the same courtesy." Looked at her steadily. "Agreed." "Good," she said. He nodded once, turned, and went back down the hall to do whatever the morning required of him, and she stood in the small clean room with the window that looked south and the bolt that didn't make a sound, and she breathed in once, deliberate, and felt something she hadn't felt in 23 days. Not safe, exactly. Something more provisional than that. Something that sounded quietly like the possibility of safe. The first week on the mountain had a texture to it that Abigail hadn't expected. She had expected awkward. She had expected the strained silences of 2 people who didn't know each other, trying to manage a shared space without either surrendering too much of themselves. She had lived through enough difficult domestic arrangements to know the particular friction of it, the careful negotiations over kitchen time and conversation, and how much eye contact constituted friendliness versus intrusion. What she got instead was something quieter and more functional than that. Nathan Cole was a man of routine, which she respected, because she was herself a woman of routine, and two people with routines tend to orbit each other without collision. He was up before dawn. She heard him moving in the kitchen, not loudly, and there was always coffee by the time she came out, which she did not take for granted. He was in the barn or the pasture by the time the sun cleared the ridge. Came in at midday for a brief meal that he assembled with a minimum of fuss bread, dried meat, whatever was in the garden. He returned to work. He came in before dark to cook something more substantial, and this was, she discovered, the hour he was most willing to talk. Length, not with elaboration. But he answered questions. Asked them, occasionally. He did not perform disinterest, and he did not perform interest, he was simply present, to whatever degree the moment seemed to call for. She worked her sewing commissions at the table in the main room, because the light there was better, and he moved around her, without comment, finding what he needed, bringing in water. Sharpening tools at the outdoor bench in the easy way of a man who has long practice at occupying a space without demanding it. On the third day, she went to help him with the fence. Asked. But she had simply appeared at the north pasture, with her work gloves and her sleeves rolled, and said, "Tell me what needs doing," and he had looked at her for a moment, with that steady, taking in quality, and then handed her a strand of wire and showed her the anchor point without making a production of it. It was hard physical work, and she did it well. The wire fought her the way wire always does, with a kind of mindless mean persistence that was exhausting, precisely because it wasn't personal. He worked the posts alongside her, and after a while the rhythm of it settled between them, the way a rhythm does when two people are working the same problem, not in conversation, but in communication, each reading the other's movement and adjusting. She missed the anchor on the fourth post, and the wire kicked back and caught the heel of her hand and left a sharp red line across it. She pulled her hand back and said something she had learned from a teamster in Pueblo that she ordinarily kept in the private vocabulary she reserved for private moments. Nathan turned. He looked at her hand. He crossed to her in 3 strides and took her wrist gently, with the thumb and 2 fingers, the way you handle something you don't want to damage, and turned her palm up to examine the cut. Deep? No, she said, just sharp. Come up to the cabin, he said. It's fine, Abigail, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. Neither of them remarked on it. He simply turned and walked toward the cabin, and after a moment she followed, because arguing about a hand cut in a north pasture in July heat was not the best use of anyone's time. He cleaned the cut with a practiced efficiency that told her he had done similar things to himself many times. He had a tin of salve that smelled of pine and something herbal she couldn't identify, and he applied it without comment and wrapped the heel of her hand with a strip of clean cloth. I've had worse, she said. I know, he said. Doesn't mean we leave it. He tied off the cloth. He was still holding her wrist, still with the thumb and 2 fingers, and she was looking at the top of his head, at the dark hair that needed cutting and was doing what it wanted. And for a fraction of a moment she was profoundly aware of the specific detail of the situation. The mountain, the cabin, the salve that smelled like pine, this large quiet man holding her wrist, like it was something worth being careful about. He put the salve away. Rest the hand for the afternoon, he said. We can finish the north section tomorrow. I was raised on a farm, she said. This is not my first fence line. He turned and looked at her, then a longer look than usual, with something in it that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. I know, he said. You said it better without gloves. She stared at him. Was that a joke? He appeared to consider the question seriously. Might have been, he said. She sat down at the main room table and picked up her sewing and did not say anything else, because there was nothing to say. But there was something warm sitting in the middle of her chest that had not been there yesterday, and she allowed it to stay there, and went back to her hem-stitching, with hands that were only slightly less than steady. On the 9th day on the mountain, she found the grave. She hadn't been looking for it. She had gone to the east side of the property to check the state of a section of kitchen garden that Nathan had mentioned was getting too dry on the ends, and she had gone farther than she intended, following the property line around a stand of pine. And she came out into a small clearing, where the grass was shorter and more carefully tended than anything else on the mountain. Markers, simple stones, set into the earth with obvious care. No names, because the stone couldn't hold them, but there were wildflowers placed at the base of each, not old flowers, not dried ones. Cut within the past day or two, she stood very still. She did not stay long. She was not there by invitation, and this was not a place she had any right to. She walked back to the kitchen garden and checked the dry section and adjusted the irrigation channel the way Nathan had shown her how to do it. And when he came in at midday, she handed him a plate of bread and the last of the hard cheese, and did not say anything about what she had found, because she had promised not to ask questions he didn't want to answer. And she had not promised not to notice things. But that evening, when the meal was done and they were sitting on the porch in the particular quiet that the mountain produced at the end of a summer day, that long, golden, a gradually cooling quiet that asked nothing of a person, she said, without looking at him, "You cut fresh flowers for them." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Every week?" She nodded. She kept looking at the valley below, at Silver Creek going soft and amber in the evening light. "Her name," she said, "if you want to say it. You don't have to." A long pause, the kind that has something at the bottom of it. "Margaret," he said. "The baby didn't live long enough for a name." She nodded once. She did not say she was sorry, because she was, but she had learned a long time ago that "I'm sorry" was sometimes the least useful thing you could offer a person carrying a loss of that size. What she did was stay where she was, on the porch, in a cooling evening, without making any move to go inside and leave him alone with it. After a while he spoke again. She was from Virginia, he said. She hated the cold up here, but she never said so. Found a letter she'd written to her mother, and never sent. She said the mountains were magnificent, but she dreamed about tobacco fields. A pause. "I'd have gone to Virginia if she'd asked." "She didn't ask," Abigail said. "Not a question. She wasn't built for asking," he said. "Neither am I much." They sat in the quiet for a while longer. The valley went dark by degrees below them, and the first stars came out, and somewhere down in the pines Nightbird said its piece and was quiet again. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He said nothing. But he didn't go inside. They stayed on the porch until the dark was complete, and it was the most comfortable silence Abigail Turner had sat in for as long as she could remember, which was a strange thing to realize and a stranger thing to hold on to. And she held it anyway because it was hers, and she had not had enough of this particular thing to be careless with any of it. It was Rosa who brought the news. She came up the mountain on a hired horse at mid-morning of the 12th day, which was not a small thing Rosa did not ride, and the fact of it told Abigail, before Rosa had even climbed down and gotten her breath, that what she had come to say was not small either. "Papers," Rosa said. "Yesterday, in the territorial court." Abigail set down the shirt she was mending. Nathan, who had come in from the barn when he heard the horse, stood in the doorway with his arms folded. "What papers?" he said, flat. "Not a question." "He's claiming adverse possession on the North Water easement," Rosa said. "He's arguing that the easement on Cole's land has been unused and improperly maintained for a period of—" She pulled a folded paper from her coat and read from it. "A period of no less than 7 years, and that therefore the right of access has reverted to the territorial commons, from which he has filed a prior claim." Silence in the cabin was very specific. "That's not true," Nathan said. "I know it isn't," Rosa said. "But he's got a judge in Glenwood Springs who owes him money, and he's filed in that jurisdiction, and the hearing is in 3 weeks. Nathan's jaw set. His hands, which had been folded across his chest, went very still. "He's been planning this," Abigail said. "For a long time," Rosa said. "He's been documenting it for 2 years, according to what I heard from Deputy Marsh. Building the argument piece by piece. The papers he filed are detailed." He's got dates, he's got affidavits. She looked at Nathan. From people in this town. Calloway, Rosa said. Mrs. Hatch. 2 men from the mine. She paused. They're saying the easement access hasn't been maintained. That the channel above the property has been blocked. That water delivery to the lower valley has been inconsistent. Nathan moved without warning. He walked out the front door and stood on the porch, and through the window Abigail could see his back, the set of his shoulders, the controlled stillness of a man holding something very large very carefully. She looked at Rosa. Rosa looked at her. There's something else, Rosa said, quieter now. Abigail waited. One of the affidavits, Rosa said, is from a woman who claims to have seen the easement channel blocked by deliberate obstruction. She met Abigail's eyes. A woman who arrived in Silver Creek 19 days ago and has been living on Cole's property for the past 12. Air in the cabin went cold, despite the summer heat pressing at the windows. They're using me, Abigail said. Price put it in the filing, Rosa said. He's claiming you came here as part of a scheme to establish habitation on the disputed land. That your presence here is evidence of Cole's intent to claim more than his right. Abigail stood up. She walked to the door. She stood beside Nathan on the porch and looked down at the valley and at Silver Creek, which looked so small and manageable from up here, and was in fact neither of those. Nathan, she said. He turned his head. I'm going to fix this, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved his face that she hadn't seen before, not the stillness, not the steadiness. Something underneath those things. Something raw and unguarded and briefly visible before he put it back where it belonged. This isn't your fight, he said. Price made it mine when he put my name on those papers, she said. And I don't leave fights that have my name on them. He held her gaze. The hat was not in his hands were at his sides. What are you going to do, he said. She thought of a contact in Denver. A woman who had her own shop and connections beyond what Silver Creek could imagine. She thought of Dr. Henney, who kept meticulous records. She thought of Louisa Marsh, who understood documentation. She thought of the irrigation channel she had helped clear and re-anchor 4 days ago, and the work order Nathan had written in his careful, minimal hand that was dated and specific. I'm going to build a case, she said. The kind that doesn't bend. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've got records. 11 years of them. Every repair, every maintenance, every delivery record. I want all of it, she said. The mountain was very still around them. Somewhere below in the valley, Harlan Price was sitting in an office he owned, in a building he owned, in a town he largely controlled, certain that he had finally found the right angle and the right moment. He had not yet made the mistake of understanding what Abigail Turner did when someone put her name on something she hadn't consented to. Wood. The records were kept in a wooden box under Nathan's bed. Not because he was hiding them. Because the space under the bed was dry and cool and out of the way, and Nathan Cole did not think of his 11 years of meticulous documentation as something valuable. He thought of it as simply what a careful man did, wrote down what he did, and when he did it, in case he ever needed to account for it to himself. That he might need to account for it to a territorial court was not something he had planned for, which was exactly what Price had been counting on. Abigail pulled the box out at noon on the day Rosa brought the news, and she sat at the main room table and went through it, while Nathan stood in the barn doing what he always did when something was wrong, working with his hands, until the rest of him caught up. She could hear him from the table, the sound of him moving, the occasional strike of a mallet. She let him work and she let herself think. The records were extraordinary. Not elegant, Nathan's handwriting was functional and spare, each entry brief and dated, the language of a man describing what was done rather than what was felt. But they were complete. 11 years of maintenance logs for the water easement. Every cleared channel, every repaired anchor, every measurement of flow volume in the dry months. Every delivery to the lower valley properties that depended on the easement. Every date and every quantity and every name. She turned pages and built a picture in her mind, and the picture was damning not for Nathan, but for Price's argument. The easement had not been unmaintained. It had been maintained with the kind of consistency that most people brought to breathing. It was so well documented that the only way to argue against it was to argue that the documentation itself was false, which required proving that Nathan Cole had fabricated 11 years of handwritten records in his own private box that no one had known about until today. The problem was the judge in Glenwood Springs. Rosa had said he owed Price money, which meant he owed Price a favor, which meant that in a hearing before that judge, the quality of Nathan's documentation might matter less than the fact of the debt. Abigail knew how these things worked. She had seen them work in Pueblo, in a different shape, but the same essential mechanism. The man with the money controlled the outcome, and the truth was what he said it was, until someone made the truth too expensive to contradict. She needed to make the truth too expensive to contradict. She turned the last page of the records and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table and thought about what she had and what she needed and the distance between the two. Then she stood up and went to the barn. Nathan was replacing a leather collar on one of the harnesses. His hands were occupied and his eyes were on the work, but he registered her presence immediately. She had noticed that about him, that he always knew where she was in his space without appearing to track her. "I need paper," she said, "and ink." He jerked his head toward the cabin. Desk in the corner, left drawer. "I'm going to write 4 letters," she said. "Night. I need them to go out on the morning stage." Up from the harness. "Who to?" "My contact in Denver. A woman named Clara Voss. She has connections to the Territorial Land Office that I believe may be relevant." She paused. "Editor of the Rocky Mountain News. I worked for a man in Pueblo who supplied paper to that office, and I have a name I can use. If this filing is documented publicly, it becomes harder to decide in bad faith without consequences." Another pause. "A lawyer named William Dern, who practices in Denver, and who, to my knowledge, has taken cases against fraudulent land claims before." Nathan was watching her. He had put the harness down. "And the 4th letter," he said. "Deputy Marshal's office," she said. "Territorial jurisdiction. If Price's affidavits contain false statements, and I believe at least 2 of them do, based on what I know about the dates involved, that's not a civil matter." "That's perjury." Nathan was very still. "You know all these people," he said. "I know of them," she said. "Or I know someone who knows them." "It's not the same thing, and I won't pretend it is. But I have to use what I have." He picked up the harness again. He worked the collar through the fitting. His hands were steady. "Abigail, why are you doing this?" "Nair." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the harness, and not from avoidance. She understood now, but because he was a man who thought better when his hands were busy, and who was asking a real question and wanted a real answer, and was giving her space to form one. "Because it's right," she said, "and because Price put my name on his documents." "And because—" She stopped. He looked up then. "Because someone should have done this for you 3 years ago," she said, "and didn't. And I'm here now, so I'm doing it." The barn was quiet around them, and Nathan Cole held her gaze with the kind of directness she had come to understand was not simple or uncomplicated. It was his version of being completely visible to another person, which was not something he offered easily or often. "Thank you," he said. It was 2 words, and he meant all of them. She went inside and wrote the 4 letters. She was at the desk past midnight, and when she finally set the pen down, her fingers were cramped, and her back was aching, and the lamp had burned low enough that she was writing the last lines of the 4th letter largely from feel and familiarity. She capped the inkwell. She folded the letters with care. She set them in a row on the edge of the desk and looked at them in the guttering light. 4 envelopes, 4 chances. She did not know how many of them would produce anything useful. Knew the lawyer was the most important, and also the longest shot, because lawyers of William Dern's caliber did not take cases for strangers in small mountain towns on the basis of a letter alone. She knew the deputy marshal was a formal channel that moved slowly. She knew the newspaper editor might or might not consider a land dispute in Silver Creek worth his column inches. She knew Clara Voss in Denver would write back within the week, because Clara Voss was efficient and well-connected and had never in Abigail's experience failed to do what she said she would do. 1 out of 4 was not nothing. She went to bed. She slept better than she expected. In the morning, Nathan drove the letters into town himself. He did not ask her to go. He came to the kitchen where she was making coffee, picked up the 4 envelopes from the table where she'd left them, and said, "I'll take these to the post office and be back by noon," and went out. She heard the wagon moving down the mountain track. He was back by 10:30, which meant he had driven fast. He came in and set his hat on the hook and poured himself coffee and said, "Calloway called out to me on the street." What did he say? He said Price wants to talk. He drank the coffee. Wanted me to know that Price is open to settling this without a court hearing. Said there was a fair offer on the table for the water rights. Abigail looked at him over her own cup. He's rattled. He doesn't know about the letters, Nathan said. He knows about Rosa coming up the mountain, she said. He knows we know about the filing. He expected you to panic or to lawyer up locally, which means using someone he already has influence over. He didn't expect letters going to Denver. How would he know about letters going to Denver? He doesn't, she said. But he knows something shifted. He can feel it, the way a man feels weather coming. He's offering the settlement now, because now is when the offer is strongest, before we've had time to organize a real response. Nathan set the cup down. "Nothing yet," she said. "Not for 3 days. Let him wonder what we're doing." Nay, he looked at her. There was something in his expression that might have been the beginning of something like admiration, though he would not have used that word. "You've done this before," he said. "I've been in difficult positions before," she said. "They teach you things." He nodded slowly. 3 days. 3 days, she confirmed. The answer from Clara Voss came in 5 days, not 7. Abigail was in the north pasture with Nathan, checking the fence work they had finished the previous week, when she heard a horse on the mountain track and turned to see Louisa Marsh coming up on a bay mare she'd borrowed from the livery, moving with the determined posture of a woman carrying urgent cargo. She was carrying a letter. Abigail met her halfway and took it and opened it standing in the summer-bright pasture with Nathan a few feet away, not crowding but present. Clara Voss wrote in short sentences and precise language that Abigail had always admired for its efficiency. She read the letter twice, then she looked up. "She knows William Dern," Abigail said. "She's already written to him. She says he's interested." Nathan was very still. "He's had 2 previous cases against fraudulent land filings in the territory," she continued. "He won both. She says he's looking at the details I sent and wants the full documentation record forwarded to Denver by the end of the week." "The wooden box," Nathan said. "I'll copy the key entries tonight," she said. "We can send the originals. I want copies kept here." She folded the letter. Clara also says she spoke to a contact at the Territorial Land Office. She says there's a process for requesting a change of venue on a filing that involves a credible claim of judicial conflict of interest. Louisa, who had been listening from the saddle, said, "Price's judge." Abigail said, "If we can document the specific financial relationship between the judge and Price, we can move the hearing out of Glenwood Springs." Nathan asked. "Pueblo," Abigail said. "Or Denver. Somewhere the judge doesn't know Harlan Price's name." Nathan turned away from her. He walked 3 paces to the fence and put one hand on the top rail and stood there, looking north, toward the ridge, toward the section of land that the water easement fed. 11 years. She understood what he was feeling without needing to be told the specific mixture of something like hope and the fear of it, the way a person who has stopped expecting good things receives the possibility of them. With caution, with a hand already braced for the fall. "Nathan," she said. He turned. "This can work," she said. He didn't say anything. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he walked back to the fence and picked up the tool he'd set down and went back to work, which was his way of saying he was going to let himself believe it carefully and see what happened. What happened next was not what any of them had planned. It was the 16th day since Rosa had brought the news of the filing. 5 days since Clara Voss's letter. Abigail had spent those days in a state of controlled momentum, copying records, writing summaries, composing the documentation package for William Dern with the methodical precision of a woman who understands that the quality of what you put in a lawyer's hands determines everything that comes after. She was so focused on the documentation that she did not notice, at first, that Nathan was not right. He had been quieter than usual for 2 days. She attributed it to the strain of the situation, the waiting, the uncertainty, the particular helplessness of a man of action who is being asked to sit still while other people fight his battle in language and paper rather than physical work. She had seen it in him before, that tension between his instinct to act and the requirement to wait, and she had learned to give him room when it settled into him. But on the morning of the 16th day, he didn't come in from the barn for coffee. Waited. She went to call him and found him at the corral fence, not working, not moving. She came closer. Nathan. He turned and she saw his face, and the thing in her chest that had been warm and provisional for the past several weeks went entirely cold. He was pale, not the kind of pale that comes from heat or cold. Kind that comes from inside when something is wrong in the body's deep places. His jaw was tight in a way that was not his usual stillness. This was controlled pain, and she knew the difference because she had seen both on his face, and they did not look the same. "How long?" she said. "It's nothing," he said. "Nathan. How long have you been feeling this way?" He turned back to the fence. "Since yesterday. You worked the full day yesterday." "I know," he said. And from the way he said it, she understood that this was not an admission of toughness, but of something else, of a man who had spent 11 years having no one to be unwell for, no reason to acknowledge when something was wrong. Because acknowledging it to himself had not helped, and there had been no one else to tell. She put her hand on his arm. He looked down at her hand and then at her. "Come inside," she said. "There's work. The fence will be there tomorrow," she said. "Come inside." He came inside. She put him in the chair at the main room table and looked at him properly, and asked questions the way Dr. Eni had shown her, not from medical training, but from good observational instinct and several years of proximity to a man in Pueblo who had taught her a useful amount about assessment before he had. He turned out to be wrong about almost everything else. Pain was in his chest and his left side. He had been having it since the previous afternoon. He had worked through it because that was what he did, and because he had not known what else to do with it. "It would be several things," she said carefully. "Some of them are not serious." "And some of them are," he said. "Yes." He absorbed that with the stillness he applied to everything that was larger than he had a word for. "Need to go for Dr. Henny," she said. "Abigail." "I'm going," she said. "I'll take the gray. I'll be back within 2 hours." "Is there anything you need before I go?" He looked at her. In 11 years on the mountain alone, no one had asked him that question in that specific context, the context of "I am leaving to help you, and I will come back." She could see that it landed on him, landed differently than it would have landed on a man who had been asked it regularly. "No," he said. "I'm all right." "I know you're all right," she said. "Nah. You're also not going up to the pasture while I'm gone." He almost smiled. "No, ma'am." She was already at the door. She pulled her riding gloves on and turned back once. He was sitting at the table with both hands flat on the wood, and his face composed into the particular expression he used when he was managing something large and private, and she held that image for the 2 seconds she could afford to hold it. "Back," she did. "I know," he said. She, in 4 mere minutes, and was down the mountain's track at a pace she would not normally have chosen, because the track was unforgiving, and the gray was large, and she had not grown up riding horses of this size. But the gray was steadier than she expected, and she was steadier than she expected, and she made the valley floor in 40 minutes and was at Dr. Henny's door before noon. Henny was with a patient. She waited 7 minutes in the hallway, and when he came out she told him what she had observed with the precision she had cultivated, and he went white in a controlled professional way and had his bag in his hand before she finished the second sentence. They rode back up the mountain together, and Abigail kept a pace that was urgent without being reckless, and she did not let herself think about anything other than the road and the horse, and the next 50 yards of track. When they came through the door, Nathan was still at the table. Upright, still had both hands flat on the surface. He looked at Henny with an expression, a very small amount of something that was not his usual composure, something that was closer to relief, which he quickly redistributed into its more acceptable container of neutral acknowledgement. "Nude, didn't think you'd come up the mountain for me," he said. "I came for her, men," Henny said, nodding at Abigail, in the tone of a man telling the truth. Terrifying when she has a mission. He set his bag on the table. "Now be quiet and let me work." Abigail went to the kitchen. She put water on. She stood with her back to the wall and her hands wrapped around her own elbows and breathed carefully and waited. Diagnosis took 40 minutes. When Henny came to the kitchen doorway, his expression was the carefully neutral version that she had learned from watching him in his office, be used when the news was mixed but not catastrophic. He said. "Inflammation of the lining around the lung. Likely from the dust. You've been doing a lot of outdoor work in dry conditions, and the air quality this summer has been poor." "It's serious?" she asked. "It can be," he said. "If it advances, it can affect the lung itself." But caught now, with rest and treatment, he paused. "He needs to stay off that pasture, off the horses, off anything requiring significant physical exertion. At least 3 weeks. He'll argue with that," she said. "I know," Henny said. "That's why I'm telling you, and not just him." She looked at him. "He'll listen to me." Henny met her eyes with a steadiness that said he'd already arrived at that conclusion. "Yes," he said. "I believe he will." She went to the main room. Nathan was still at the table, but he had shifted one arm on the surface, his weight to one side, the slight, unconscious lean of a person whose body has decided it does not need to perform absolute uprightness anymore. 3 weeks, she said. "Abigail, 3 weeks," she said. "Fence is done. The water channel is clear. The horses are healthy. There is nothing on this property that cannot wait 3 weeks. The documentation, I'll finish it," she said. "I've been doing it for 5 days. I can do 3 more. He looked at her with that direct, unguarded quality, the one that appeared when he was too tired to maintain his usual careful presentation of himself. "This is my land," he said, "my fight." "I know," she said. "Yeah. And you're going to be well enough to stand up in a courtroom and tell them that, which means you are going to rest for 3 weeks while I finish what needs to be finished." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You are," he said, a quality she had not heard in his voice before. The most determined person I have ever encountered." "I've been told," she said. "I don't mean it as a complaint." "I know," she said. She helped him to the back room not because he couldn't walk, but because the cab was narrow and the light was poor, and she wanted to be useful in the small physical way that was available to her right now, when the larger useful things were still pending. He was heavier than he looked, which was an accomplishment. He moved with the controlled, careful quality of a man managing significant discomfort without performing it. She settled him in and stood in the doorway. "I'll bring food in an hour," she said. "You don't have a where," she said. He lay back against the pillow and closed his eyes, and the tension that had been in his jaw and his shoulders since the morning released, slowly. Like something that had been wound too tight for too long and had finally been given permission to come down. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at him, this enormous, careful, solitary man who had spent 11 years taking care of everything and everyone around him with quiet consistency, who had never had anyone turn around and ask what he needed, who had kept 11 years of records in a wooden box because he was thorough and did not know they were valuable until someone sat down with him, told him so. Went back to the desk. She picked up the pen. Yet the letter from William Dern arrived 9 days before the scheduled hearing. It was 4 pages long, written in the careful, structured language of a man who chose every word for its legal weight. Abigail read it at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning and had to read it twice because the first time her hands were shaking slightly, and she was not entirely absorbing every line. Dern was taking the case. He had reviewed the documentation she had sent. He had also, through channels he did not specify but that Clara Voss had clearly activated, obtained information about the financial relationship between Price and the Glenwood Springs judge. He had filed a motion for change of venue. The motion had been granted. The hearing was being moved to Denver. He was arriving in Silver Creek in 4 days to meet with Nathan and review the original records. She sat for a moment with the letter in her hands. Then she stood up and walked to Nathan's room and knocked once. Come in, he said. He was awake. He was always awake early. Even during the rest period he had been maintaining with more compliance than she'd expected. Though she suspected this had more to do with being genuinely unwell than with any particular concession to her authority. She sat on the edge of the chair by the window and held the letter out. He read it again. She watched his face. There was a moment, brief, private, and not entirely suppressed, where something crossed his features that she thought she had not seen before. Not relief, though that was there. Not triumph, though that was coming. Something more fundamental than either of those. The expression of a man who had stopped, at some point in the past 11 years, believing that anything he had built would hold, and who was now confronted with the possibility that he had been wrong about that. He set the letter down on the quilt. Denver, he said. Denver, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. Did you do this? Clara Voss did most of it, she said. And your records. 11 years of your records did the rest. You documented everything, Nathan. Every single maintenance, every delivery date, every measurement. There's no universe in which Price's affidavits survive contact with what's in that wooden box. He looked at her. I didn't keep those records because I thought they'd matter. I know, she said. You kept them because you're careful. Because you're thorough. Because you do things the right way even when no one is watching. She met his eyes. That's what's going to win this. He reached out and picked up the letter again, not to read it but to hold it. The way you hold something you're still deciding is real. Days, he said. The lawyer comes in 4 days. Are you going to be well enough to meet with him? He looked at her. The look contained a very specific quality that she had come to translate accurately, the look of a man who is going to do something, regardless of whether he is technically well enough, but who appreciates being asked. Yes, he said. Good, she said. Because I've been building an argument for 3 weeks, and I need you in the room when I present it. He held her gaze. There was something in his face that the 11 years of living alone had made him unpracticed at, something that lived in the space between gratitude and a thing larger than gratitude. A thing that does not have a clean name, but that a person feels in the chest, when another human being has stood in the gap for them and refused to move. Abigail, he said, yes, I want you to know something. He waited. When I walked into Calloway's that first day, he said I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. He stopped, turned the edge of the letter in his hands. I just knew it was wrong, what he was doing, and I knew I could stop it. He paused again. I've done things in this town, because they were right, and it cost me nothing. I've helped people and then gone back up the mountain and not thought about it again. She was very still. I've thought about this, he said. About every day since. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man, who had chosen 11 years of solitude because the world had taken from him everything he loved and he had decided it was safer to stop offering. Who cut flowers for a grave every week because he was not the kind of man who stopped loving someone just because they were gone. Who had walked into a doorway and changed the direction of something without knowing he was doing it. I know, she said quietly. He looked up. I've thought about you too, she said. Every day the room was very quiet. Outside, the mountain was going about its summer business, the horses moving in the corral, the wind off the ridge, the dry creak of timber in the afternoon heat. The world, seating as it always did, indifferent to the small, specific thing that was happening in the corner room of a cabin above the valley. Nathan Cole put the letter down on the quilt. He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with the full weight of his hand, the warmth of it, deliberate and unhurried. She turned her hand over. They stayed that way for a while, not speaking, because there was nothing that needed to be said that the contact wasn't already saying more clearly. Downstairs in Silver Creek, Harlan Price received his own letter that afternoon. It was from a law office in Denver. It informed him that the venue change had been granted, that a motion to compel production of all financial documentation related to his land acquisition activities in the Silver Creek territory had been filed, and that an additional inquiry had been opened by the Office of the Territorial Deputy Marshal regarding the accuracy of sworn affidavits submitted in support of his original claim. He read it 3 times. He called his man, the lean, sharp-featured one, into the office. "Go find out," he said, "everything you can about the woman on Cole's Mountain." The man left. Price sat alone in his office with the letter on his desk and understood for the first time that he had made a significant miscalculation. He had looked at Abigail Turner and seen a woman with nothing, no money, no connections, no ally, no standing in a town he controlled. He had seen a liability he could attach to Nathan Cole, a weapon he could use. He had not seen what she actually was. He was beginning to see it now. He picked up the letter and read it a 4th time, and what he felt was not quite fear, because men like Harlan Price did not admit to fear. But it was what fear looks like when it is put on a suit and is trying to pass for something more respectable. And, on the mountain above him, the lamp in the cabin was lit. And inside, at the table by the window, Abigail Turner was writing the final section of the documentation package by lamplight, and Nathan Cole was sitting across from her, out of his room for the first time in 3 days. Moving carefully, but moving, reading through the pages. She had finished and saying nothing, because there was nothing to improve and he knew it. At one point he set a page down and looked at her, and she looked up, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he picked up the next page, and she went back to writing. Outside, the mountain held them both, patient and enormous, and the stars came out one by one over the ridge. And Silver Creek glittered small and bright in the dark below, like something that had once seemed large and had slowly revealed its actual size. William Dern arrived on the Tuesday stage, 4 days after his letter, and he was not what Silver Creek expected. The town had formed an opinion in advance, the small towns always do, constructing a person from the ship of their reputation, before the actual human being has a chance to complicate the picture. They expected a lawyer from Denver to arrive with a certain amount of performance. Polished boots, a commanding entrance, the theatrical confidence of a man who has won enough cases to have started believing the stories told about him. What stepped off the stage was a man of 53 with a worn leather satchel over one shoulder, and reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and the unhurried quality of someone who had stopped, needing to prove anything to rooms he hadn't entered yet. He was not tall. He was not particularly imposing. He had a face that had been weathered by decades of listening to people in difficult circumstances. And what that weathering produced was not hardness, but a kind of attentive patience, the expression of a man who had learned that the truth was always in the details, and that the details required time. He asked the stage driver where to find Jim Dunmore's establishment, and walked there directly. And by the time the town had finished forming its revised opinion of him, he was already inside, and Rosa was pouring him coffee. Abigail was waiting. She had come down from the mountain that morning, leaving Nathan with explicit instructions that he was not to attempt the north pasture, the barn roof, or any project requiring a ladder while she was gone. He had agreed with the careful compliance of a man who was feeling substantially better, and was therefore more likely to attempt all 3 the moment she was out of sight. He had told him this, smiled. She had ridden the gray down alone, for the first time, which had gone better than expected, and had arrived at Dunmore's 40 minutes before the stage. She and Dern sat in the back room, the same rooms as she had slept in for 18 days, that now felt like another life entirely. And she spread the documentation across the table and walked him through it from the beginning. He did not interrupt. He read with the focused silence of a man to whom documents were a native language, making occasional small marks in the margins with a pencil he produced from his vest pocket, his face giving nothing away. It took 2 hours. When she finished, he set the last page down and took his spectacles off his forehead and polished them with a cloth from his pocket and said, "How did you get him to keep records this complete?" "Idn't," she said. "He kept them before I arrived. He's been keeping them for 11 years. Dern looked at her over his spectacles. "A man who documents his own property maintenance for 11 years without being asked isn't trying to build a case." She said, "Yes." He put the spectacles back. Price's affidavits claim the easement channel was blocked and unmaintained for a period of no less than 7 years. Cole's records document maintenance activities for every single year of that period, including, and this is the detail that is going to matter most, including 3 specific dates in the past 14 months where he rerouted and cleared the lower section of the channel that feeds the property's Price claims were being denied water access. "I noticed that too," she said. "The affidavits claiming water denial were signed by 2 men from the mine," Dern said. "You know them?" "Not personally," she said, "but I know who does." She paused. "Deputy Marsh, Louisa Marsh's husband, he knows both of them." He told Louisa that one of them signed because he owed Price money and the other signed because he was afraid of losing his position at the mine. Dern was quiet for a moment. "Fear and debt," he said. "That's the whole of Price's operation, isn't it?" "As far as I can tell," she said. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of a man organizing a strategy. "NU changes confirmed," he said. "Denver. Before Judge Aldrich, who I have appeared before 12 times and who has the particular virtue of not caring what anyone owes Harlan Price." He paused. "I want Nathan Cole in that courtroom. I want his records. Yeah. And I want testimony from the property owners in the lower valley who received water through that easement. Near. How many do you need?" 3, who are willing to state, under oath, that they received consistent water access through Cole's channel during the period Price claims it was blocked, Dern said. 3 clear, direct statements from landowners with no stake in the outcome other than telling the truth. "I'll get them," she said. Dern looked at her. "You know," he said carefully, "when Clara Voss wrote to me about this case, she described the situation, but she didn't describe you particularly." "Clara's efficient," Abigail said. "She keeps to the relevant details." "She said there was a woman involved," he said. "She said the woman was the reason I should take the case seriously." He paused. "Nah. I'd like to know what your stake is in this, Miss Turner, if you're willing to say." She looked at him steadily. "Price put my name in his filing," she said. "He used my presence on Nathan's property as evidence of fraudulent intent. He turned me into a weapon against a man who helped me when this town refused to." And she held Dern's gaze. "And I don't leave things unfinished," she said. "And this is not finished." He nodded once. It was the nod of a man who has received a sufficient answer. "I'd like to meet Mr. Cole tomorrow," he said. "Can you bring him down?" "He'll come down himself," she said. "He won't want me driving him." Dern's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it. "No," he said. "I don't suppose he would." Nay. Nathan came down the mountain the next morning on the gray, moving at a pace that Abigail, riding alongside him on the dun, observed carefully and decided was responsible enough not to require comment. He was dressed in the cleanest version of his usual self, the same leather vest, but brushed, and a shirt that was newer than his others. He had not cut his hair, because she had not suggested it, and because Nathan Cole was not a man who prepared his appearance for anyone's opinion. He had trimmed the beard by half an inch, which she noticed and chose not to remark on. They tied the horses at Dunmore's and went inside. Dern stood when Nathan came through the door, which was the right thing to do, and which Nathan did not appear to register as either expected or unusual. They shook hands in the brief, evaluative manner of 2 men taking each other's measure and arriving, in simultaneously, a qualified but genuine respect. They sat down. Dern put the records on the table between them. "I need to ask you questions about these," he said. Some of them will seem obvious. Some of them will seem repetitive. Answer all of them as precisely as you can, because the precision is what matters. All right, Nathan said. Did you, at any point in the past 7 years, deliberately obstruct or reduce the water flow through the easement channel on the north section of your property? No. Did you at any point prevent or delay water access to properties in the lower valley that depend on that channel? No. The maintenance records, dated April 14, 1881, the clearance of the lower channel section. You did that yourself? Myself and a man named Pete Carver who worked for me that spring. Moved on to Nevada the following autumn. Is he reachable? I have an address in Reno that's 2 years old, Nathan said. Might still be good. Dern made a note. The records show a flow measurement taken on that same date. 12 gallons per minute. That's a very specific number for a man to record. I had a gauge, Nathan said. Made it myself. It's still on the property. Dern looked up from his notes. You made a water flow gauge, he said. I needed to know if the channel form to standard, Nathan said, with the particular flatness of a man stating something that seems to him entirely logical. So I made something to measure it. Dern sat back. Mr. Cole, he said carefully, in 30 years of territorial land law, I have never encountered a defendant who maintained more meticulous documentation than you have. I want you to understand what that means for this case. Nathan was quiet. It means, Dern said, that Price's affidavits do not merely contradict your records. Your records make his affidavits impossible. A man cannot simultaneously block a water channel and measure its flow rate on the same date. The records don't just defend you. They prove the affidavits were fabricated. The room was very still. Abigail watched Nathan's face. She watched the thing that moved through it, the careful, private quality of a man receiving information that contradicts the story he has been living inside. For 3 years, Price had been telling Nathan Cole that he was a problem, that his land was a dispute, that what he had built was precarious and contestable. For 3 years, Nathan had stood on his mountain and refused to move, but he had absorbed some of it the way stone absorbs water, gradually, in ways you don't see until the crack appears. Now, Dern was telling him that the stone was solid all the way through. Made it up, Nathan said. Not a question, but a statement that required saying out loud. Commissioned it, Dern said. There's a difference. He found people who owed him enough to say what he needed said. Yes, the factual basis of his filing does not exist. Nathan set his hands flat on the table. What happens to the people who signed those affidavits? He said. If we can demonstrate they contained false statements made under oath, Dern said that becomes a matter for the territorial marshal. Nathan absorbed that. The men from the mine, he said. One of them has a family. Abigail looked at him. Dern said. That'll be for the marshal to weigh. What I can tell you is that's not your responsibility to manage. I know whose responsibility it is, Nathan said. I'm just saying I know about the family. Dern looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Abigail. Then he looked back at Nathan. I'll note it, he said quietly. In the appropriate place. The 3 landowners took 2 days to secure. Abigail did it herself on horseback, covering the lower valley properties in a systematic pattern that Louisa had helped her map. She had expected resistance. These were people who lived and worked in Price's economic shadow, who had mortgages with his bank and supply accounts at establishments he influenced. Asking them to testify against him was asking them to stand in a courtroom and make an enemy of the man who could call their notes. The first one said no immediately. He was apologetic about it, and she believed the apology was genuine, and she thanked him and left. The second one, a woman named Iris Callum, who ran a small sheep operation on the south end of the valley and who had the particular fortified quality of someone who had been surviving on her own for long enough to have stopped being afraid of most. Ding said, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask me that question. She signed a statement on the spot. The third was harder. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he ran the biggest spread in the lower valley outside of Price's own interests, and he had the most to lose. He met Abigail on his porch and listened to her without interrupting, and then was quiet for a long time. "If this goes wrong," he said, "and Price survives it, and men like Price have survived things before he'll come for me." "Nate," Abigail said, "I won't lie to you about that." He looked at her. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe Cole anything." "I disagree," she said. "He helped you when you came to town?" "Yes," she said, "but that's not the only reason." "What's the other reason?" She thought about how to say it. "Because the truth is in the records," she said. 11 years of it, in a wooden box that a man kept because he was thorough and careful, and because he did his work right every single time regardless of whether anyone was watching. And that truth is going to Denver in 2 weeks, and it is going to stand up in front of a judge who doesn't owe Harlan Price anything. And when it does, the only question is whether the people in this valley who know what they know are going to say it out loud or let a lie win because they were afraid. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where do I sign?" Price's response came 3 days before the Denver hearing, and it came in a shape that none of them had anticipated. It was not a legal maneuver. It was not another affidavit, or a counterfiling, or a procedural motion. It was a visit. Price himself came up the mountain. Abigail heard the horse on the track at mid-morning and went to the porch and recognized the posture, immediately the precise, controlled bearing of a man who has decided to play his final card and is managing the performance of it carefully. He was alone, which surprised her. Price was not a man who went places without an audience. Nathan was at the barn. She did not call him. Price came to the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. "Miss Turner," he said. "Mr. Price," she said. "I'd like to speak with Cole," he said. "He's working," she said. "I'll wait." "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. His jaw tightened slightly. He recalibrated. "Then perhaps you'll relay something." "Perhaps," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The performance quality of him, the careful management of his presentation, slipped by a fraction of a degree, and what came through was something she had not expected to see on Harlan Price's face. It was not guilt. It was something colder and more specific. It was the expression of a man who has run every calculation and has arrived at a number he doesn't like. "I'd like to discuss a settlement," he said, "before Denver." "What kind of settlement?" "I'll withdraw the filing," he said. "Entirely. In exchange for a recorded easement agreement, formal, legal, documented that guarantees Cole's water access for a period of 20 years. Beyond that, no further claims from either party." Ned nothing. She watched his face. "In addition," he said, and this next part, cost him something she could see it costing him, could see the specific quality of a proud man doing arithmetic that ends in a concession. "I'll make a payment to Cole for legal costs incurred." Mountain was very quiet. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "I beg your pardon. Why are you offering this now?" she said. 3 days before the hearing. Not 3 months ago when you filed. Not 3 weeks ago when we sent the documentation to Denver. Now, he said nothing. "Because you've seen what's in that documentation," she said. Because Dern filed a disclosure motion, and your people looked at what we submitted, and you know what's coming. And you've decided that losing in Denver in front of Judge Aldrich with fabricated affidavits and a bribed judge's name in the record is worse for you than settling quietly. His face was very controlled. "I'm offering Cole something he wants," he said. 20 years of protected access. That's worth more than a court victory that still has to be enforced. "He already has the access," she said. "He's had it for 11 years. "He didn't have it in writing." "No," she said. "He didn't need it in writing because the law was already on his side. You just made him prove it." Price looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah." And she saw clearly, without ambiguity, the moment when he understood that this was not going to go the way he had calculated when he first saw her step off the stage with a battered suitcase and a coin that wasn't enough for crackers. "I want to talk to Cole," he said. "Mr. Price, I will tell Nathan about your offer. He does with it is his decision, not mine." She paused. "Yeah, but I'll tell you what I think, for what it's worth." "Nay." He waited. "I think you should have that offer in writing, Eden," she said, "prepared by your own lawyer, on my desk by tomorrow morning. Because Nathan Cole is going to Denver either way. And if you want to settle this before he gets there, the offer needs to be something he can hold in his hands. And Price looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned his horse around without another word and rode back down the mountain. She stood on the porch until he was out of sight. Then she sat down on the top step, and her hands, which had been completely steady for the entire conversation, shook for approximately 30 seconds, and then she made them stop. Nathan came around the corner from the barn. He had seen the horse. "Of Price," she said. "I know," he said. "I was watching from the east side of the barn." She looked at him. "Let me handle it." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He came up to the porch and sat on the step beside her. Not close enough to crowd, but close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the specific solidity of a man who has made his body useful for decades and carries it accordingly. "Because you're better at it than I am," he said simply. "Because if I'd come out of that barn, I'd have said 3 words, and none of them would have been strategic." She almost laughed. "What would the 3 words have been?" "There, get off my land." She did laugh then. Quietly, but genuinely, and it surprised her the way real laughter always surprises a person who has been managing something difficult for a long time. Nathan was watching her, with an expression she had no name for yet, but that she was beginning to catalog the specific way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. When his careful composure relaxed into something that had not been permitted out in 11 years, and was finding cautiously that the air was safe. He's going to put a settlement offer in writing," she said. "By tomorrow morning. And I think you should take it," she said. He looked at her. "You said Denver was the right move." "Denver is still the right move if the settlement isn't right," she said. "But if he's offering 20 years of protected access in a legal document plus cost Nathan, that's the mountain secured." "That's what you were fighting for." "He humiliated you," Nathan said. "Day you came to town. He's the one who organized it. The rooms, the jobs, Calloway doesn't move without Price behind him." "I know," she said. "You'd settle for paper. I'd settle for the mountain being yours for the next 20 years, she said. "And for Price, knowing that we could have taken him to Denver and won." "He knows it. That's why he's here." She turned and looked at Nathan directly. "The court victory would feel better for about a week. The legal document lasts 20 years. He was quiet for a long time. "Abigail," he said. "Yes, you came to this town with a broken suitcase and $17, he said. Greece ran half the population against you inside of 48 hours. You turned all of it around in 5 weeks. She looked at her hands. "Records were already there," she said. "I just organized them." That's not all you did." "You stayed," he said. "When you had every reason to leave. You stayed and you fought and you—" He stopped. Turned the edge of his boot against the step, looking down. "I've been on this mountain for 11 years, he said, believing that the right thing to do was to take up less space. Ask less of people, to not." He stopped again. Then he looked up. "I don't know how to do this well. I want you to know that I know that about myself." "But well," she said, though she knew. "This," he said. Didn't gesture. He didn't need to. Nay. The word contained everything in its short syllable: the mountain, the porch, the 2 of them sits in the step in the August heat, with the valley below, and something between them that was past provisional and not yet named. "I know," she said. "You've been out of practice." 11 years out of practice. "That's recoverable," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face moved slowly, like the mountain shifting, like something that has been fixed for a long time beginning to understand that it doesn't have to be. "Is it?" "Yes," she said. "I'm fairly certain." He reached over and took her hand. Not the careful 2-finger grip he'd used when she cut herself on the fence wire. His whole hand, her whole hand inside at it, the warmth of his palm against her knuckles, the steadiness of it, a man who had spent 11 years being steady for no one in particular, offering it now to a specific person for a specific reason. She held on. The settlement offer arrived the next morning, delivered by Price's lawyer, a different man than the lean vest-wearing one who had walked beside her on the street. This was an older man, with a look of professional embarrassment that told Abigail he knew exactly what he was delivering and what it meant for his client's position. Nathan read it at the kitchen table. Then he passed it to Abigail. And he passed it to Dern, who had come up the mountain specifically for this, and who read it with the focused efficiency of a man cataloging every word for its legal content. Dern set it down. 22 years, he said. He went up from 20. He's negotiating, Abigail said. He doesn't have a position to negotiate from, Dern said. He knows that. This is face-saving. He looked at Nathan. It's your decision. The Denver case is solid. We can win it. If we go to Denver, Nathan said, what happens to the affidavit signers? Dern was quiet for a moment. The marshal will pursue it, he said. The outcome depends on what each man can demonstrate about the circumstances of the signing. The one with the family, he paused. It's possible a compelling case for duress could be made. It's not certain. Nathan looked at the settlement document. Mine man with the family, he said. His name is Elroy Marsh. Abigail looked at him sharply. Marsh. Is he Deputy Marsh's brother? Nathan said. Hitchin was very quiet. You knew, she said. I found out last week, he said, when Louisa told me about the deputy helping with the Lower Valley properties. I did the math. He paused. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place to make your decisions for you. Abigail sat with that for a moment. She thought about Louisa Marsh, who had sat on the schoolhouse step eating a biscuit and told her in plain terms that Nathan Cole was the only person in Silver Creek that Price was genuinely afraid of. Who had helped her map the Lower Valley properties without asking why. Whose husband had quietly provided information about the affidavit signers without making it a formal act. Who had a brother-in-law whose signature was on a document that could send him to a territorial prison. She knows, Abigail said. It was not a question, so Nathan said. She looked at the settlement document. She looked at Dern. Nathan signs this. Price withdraws the filing. The affidavits become moot. The marshal's inquiry loses its basis. Effectively, yes, Dern said. She looked at Nathan. Nang. He was watching her, and his face had the open, unguarded quality it had now in private, the face underneath the mountain stillness. The one that was learning, slowly and with considerable effort, to be visible. It's your land, she said. Your decision. You helped build the case, he said. I want your voice in it. She looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at Louisa Marsh's face in her mind, the biscuit, the blunt practical assessment, the quiet help offered without conditions. Sign it, she said. Nathan picked up the pen. He signed his name in the careful, precise hand of a man who had been writing in ledgers for 11 years, clean and deliberate and final. He set the pen down. It's done, Dern said. Nathan looked at the document for a moment. He looked at Abigail. Not quite, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Price's men told you on the street, he said, that your work in this town depended on his goodwill. That he set the current. He leaned back. A man who's just settled a case he built on fabricated affidavits and whose financial relationship with a territorial judge is now in a lawyer's files in Denver does not set the current anymore. Looked at him. I want to go into town, he said. Today, both of us. Why? Because the settlement gets recorded at the land office, he said. And I want to walk into that office with you beside me, and I want the town to see it. She was quiet for a moment. You've spent 11 years going into town alone, she said. Yes, he said, I have. He stood up from the table. He reached for his hat, and Abigail Turner, who had arrived in Silver Creek, Colorado with a battered suitcase and $17.40 and a name nobody respected, stood up and went to get her gloves. They rode into Silver Creek at midday. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just the two of them on the gray and the dun, it side by side, coming down the main street at a pace that was neither hurried nor performing itself, in the way that things which are simply true do not need to perform anything. The town noticed. Calloway stepped out of his mercantile and looked. Mrs. Hatch, coming out of the post office with a bundle of mail, stopped and looked. The two men from the mine were at the far end of the street, and they looked. And Harlan Price, who happened to be crossing from his bank to the dry goods building when the two horses came down the main street, stopped in the middle of the road and looked. Nathan did not look at any of them. He looked at the land office. He rode to it, hung down. But Ned wrapped the reins and held out a hand to Abigail, who took it and stepped down from the dun in a single clean motion. They walked into the land office together, and Silver Creek, watching from its doorways and its windows and the middle of its dusty main street, understood something that it would take some of them a long time to say out loud, but that all of them understood in that moment with complete clarity. The man everyone had feared had made his decision, and the woman they had laughed at had made hers. And Harlan Price, standing in the middle of the road with his hands at his sides and his plans in pieces around him, was looking at the closed door of the land office and understanding, for the first time in 15 years, what it felt like to have run out of current. The land office clerk was a thin, careful man named Gerald Pitt, who had worked in that office for 9 years, and who had been in 9 years and processed a great many documents without allowing himself to have opinions about them. He had opinions. He simply kept them in a private drawer that he did not open during business hours. He opened it a little when Nathan Cole and Abigail Turner walked through his door. He had been at his window when they came down the main street. He had watched Price stop in the road. He had watched the town stop around him. He had been recording documents for 9 years in Silver Creek, and he understood, with the particular clarity of a man whose entire professional life consists of watching what gets made permanent and what gets erased, that something was being made permanent right now. He processed the settlement recording with complete professional efficiency. He did not allow himself to smile until they were back out the door. Then he allowed himself a small one, directed at his desk, which was not watching and did not require him to explain it. Outside, Nathan untied the horses. Abigail stood on the boardwalk for a moment and looked at the main street of Silver Creek, the same street she had walked on 61 days ago, with a battered suitcase and a coin that wasn't enough for crackers. The same dust, the same false fronts, the same flag over the assay office, though today there was a small wind and it was moving. Calloway was still in his doorway. She looked at him directly. He looked back. Then he looked at the ground. She looked at Mrs., who was still holding her bundle of mail. Mrs. Hatch held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds and then turned and walked quickly back inside the post office, which was, Abigail thought, a form of honesty she could respect. Harlan Price was gone from the middle of the road. She did not look for him. Nathan came to stand beside her. He held the gray's reins loosely and looked at the street beside her, not at her, in the particular way he had of being beside her that was its own kind of language by now present, deliberate, unhurried. "But I want to go to Dunmore's," he said. "Rose'll want to hear it directly." "Yes," she said, "and I want coffee that someone else made." "You make good coffee," he said. "You make adequate coffee," she said. "Rosa makes good coffee." He looked at her with the expression that she had catalogued 3 weeks ago as his version of amusement. "I'll work on it," he said. "See that you do," she said. They walked the horses to Dunmore's hitching post and went inside. Rosa cried. Not dramatically. Rosa was not a dramatic woman. She cried in the specific contained way of someone who has been holding a considerable amount of feeling in a container of practical competence for a long time and has finally been given a reason to set it down. She wiped her eyes with her apron, made a sound of controlled irritation at herself, and poured them both coffee with hands that were only slightly unsteady. 22 years, she said. 22, Nathan confirmed. In writing, filed and recorded, Abigail said. Gerald Pitt processed it himself. Rosa set the coffee pot down and looked at Nathan Cole with the expression of a woman who has known a man for 11 years, has watched him carry something too heavy in silence for all of those years, and is now watching him set it down. "Wife would have been glad," Rosa said. The kitchen went very quiet. Nathan looked at his coffee cup. Yes, he said. I expect she would have. Rosa looked at Abigail. The look said several things simultaneously, things that Rosa, being Rosa, would never say out loud in sequence but had no objection to communicating in a single direct glance. Abigail received the look and held it and gave a small nod that said she understood and was not unaware of the weight of it. Rosa nodded back. She picked up the coffee pot and went to attend to something in the other room that probably did not need attending to, but that gave the two people at her kitchen table a moment that was theirs. Nathan looked up from his cup. "You heard what she said," he said. "Did," Abigail said. "Does it?" He stopped, started again. "I want to ask you something, but I'm not sure I have the words in the right order." "Try them out of order," she said. "I'll sort it." He looked at her. "Margaret was my wife," he said. "I loved her. That doesn't go away. I don't think it's supposed to." He paused. "But I've been living like it was supposed to. Like loving her meant I was done. Like the mountain was what I deserved for the rest of it." She was very still. "You showed up," he said, "with your suitcase and your coin and your spine so straight it should have broken under all of it. And you—" He stopped. He set his hands flat on the table. "You reminded me what it looks like when someone is actually alive. Not just surviving, alive." She looked at him across the kitchen table and did not say anything for a moment, because the moment deserved not being rushed. "Nathan," she said. "Yes. I came to Silver Creek because I had nowhere else to go," she said. "That's the plain truth, and I won't dress it up. But I'm staying." She paused. "I'm staying because of what's on that mountain. Because of the records in a wooden box. Because of fresh flowers on a grave every week. Because of a man who walked into a doorway and held it open without calculating the cost." The eyes didn't leave her face. "I'm staying," she said simply. He reached across the table. She took his hand. The same way she had in the corner room 3 weeks ago. Fully, deliberately, without qualification. They sat that way in Rosa's kitchen, while the coffee went warm and the sounds of Silver Creek went about their business outside, and the summer afternoon did what summer afternoons in Colorado do, which is burn slowly and beautifully toward something cooler. Rosa came back after a suitable interval, looked at their joined hands on the table, and went directly to the stove without comment, which was her highest form of approval. The changes in Silver Creek came the way real changes always come, not in a single dramatic reversal, but in accumulation. Small shifts that compounded until the landscape looked different without anyone being able to identify the precise moment it had changed. The first change was Eldon Calloway. He came to Dunmore's on the 4th day after the settlement recording, and he came alone, and he asked to speak with Abigail. Dunmore looked at her. She nodded. They sat at the corner table in the empty mid-morning saloon, and Calloway did not look comfortable, which was appropriate, because he wasn't. "I want to apologize," he said. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed and is saying before he loses his nerve. "For what I did the day you came in, the prices, the laughing." "All right," she said. He blinked. He had expected more resistance. "That's it? What else would you like me to say?" she said. "I thought you might. I expected anger." "I have anger," she said. "I've simply decided what to do with it, and it isn't this." She looked at him steadily. "What you did was wrong, Mr. Calloway. You know that. I suspect you knew it while you were doing it. An apology doesn't undo it, but it's something, and I'll take it for what it is." Nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "I need a seamstress," he said. "My wife has alterations that have been sitting for 4 months. She's been going without," because he paused, "because I made the situation in this town what it is for you, and she wasn't willing to benefit from that." Abigail looked at him. "She sounds like a woman worth knowing," she said. He said, "considerably better than me on most days." "Enter to see me," Abigail said. "I work out of the mountain property now, but I come to town on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'll be at the schoolhouse those days. Louisa Marsh has given me space." He nodded. He stood up. He started to say something else, and then decided against it, and simply put his hat on and left. Abigail sat at the table for a moment, and looked at the place where he'd been, and thought about what Rosa had said once, that Silver Creek followed Price Current, had followed it for 15 years. She thought about what happens to a town when the current changes. The town changes with it, or whether it looks around in confusion, or whether it does what it always does, builds a new story about itself, in which it had been reasonable all along. She thought it was probably some combination of all three. She could laugh that. The second change was Harlan Price. Not apologize. She had not expected him to. Of his particular construction, the careful architecture of self-justification, built over decades of having the room arranged in their favor, do not apologize, because they have not finished revising the story in which they were not wrong. What he did was leave, not immediately, and not with announcement. Over the following 6 weeks, quietly and without drama, he began the process of disentangling himself from Silver Creek. He sold 2 of his commercial properties. He called in 2 loans at terms that were for him unusually fair. He reduced his presence at the town council. By the end of September, the lean, sharp-featured man had gone. A broader, quieter one followed 2 weeks later. Rosa reported it to Abigail with the satisfaction of someone watching a weather system move out. He's going to Leadville, she said. Bigger operations. More money. He'll start over with more room, and fewer people who know what happened. Will he? Abigail said. Probably, Rosa said. Men like that don't stop. They just relocate, she paused. But he's not here anymore. And his name on a letter doesn't mean what it used to mean in this valley. And the judge in Glenwood Springs has been very quiet recently, which I understand has something to do with a certain letter in a lawyer's files in Denver. I wouldn't know anything about that, Abigail said. Rosa looked at her. She said, Of course not. The third change was the one Abigail had not anticipated, and it was the one that mattered most. It was a Tuesday morning, her regular day in town, 6 weeks after the settlement. She was at the schoolhouse with 3 women who had come for alterations, Mrs. A. Calloway, whose husband had been right about her being worth knowing, a miner's wife named Dora Fitch, who had a coat that needed complete remaking, and Iris Callum, the sheep farmer from the South Valley, who had signed her statement without hesitation, and who had turned out to have a very specific and demanding set of opinions about the quality of stitching she expected. Abigail was in the middle of fitting a seam on Dora Fitch's coat when the door opened, and Mrs. Hatch came in. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when someone enters who is understood to require a response. Mrs. Hatch was holding a folded piece of paper. She stood in the doorway and looked at Abigail with the expression of a woman who has made a decision and intends to see it through before her nerve fails. I'd like to speak with you, she said. If you have a moment. Abigail looked at Dora Fitch. Hold still, she said. Then to Mrs. Hatch, I'll be 2 minutes. Wait there. Mrs. Hatch waited there. Abigail finished the seam, gently, pinned it, helped Dora out of the coat, and crossed the room to the door. She and Mrs. Hatch stepped outside. I have a boarding house, Mrs. Hatch said, without preamble, 6 rooms. Nah, I've been running it for 12 years. She was looking at a point slightly past Abigail's left shoulder, which was how she managed to say what she was saying. When you came to town, I turned you away. I told you I had no rooms. I had 3 empty rooms, and I turned you away because Price had put the word out, and I was... She stopped. I was afraid of what it would cost me. Abigail said nothing. I want to offer you a room, Mrs. Hatch said. A proper one. Not the back of a saloon. She held out the folded paper. I've written the terms. They're fair. You can have someone read them and check. A room with a proper window and a wardrobe. I'd want to have a seamstress in the house, because my boarders ask me regularly, and I have to send them elsewhere, and if you're in town Tuesdays and Thursdays... Mrs. Hatch, Abigail said. The woman stopped. I appreciate this, Abigail said. I mean that genuinely. What you're offering is fair, and I believe you mean it honestly. Mrs. Hatch looked at her directly for the first time. But she said, I live on the mountain, Abigail said. Something moved across Mrs. Hatch's face, a rapid series of revisions. Oh, she said. The room in town would be useful for the 2 days a week, Abigail said. If that's something you'd consider. I'm not asking for charity. I'd pay the market rate for a room used 2 nights a week. Mrs. Hatch recalibrated again. With the efficiency of a practical woman who runs an establishment for 12 years and understands that the shape of an arrangement can be negotiated without losing its essential function. Tuesday and Wednesday nights, she said. A room with a wardrobe. You have a client in the mornings. She can come to the house rather than the schoolhouse. Agreed, Abigail said. Mrs. Hatch held out the paper. I'll have new terms written by Thursday. She left. Abigail stood outside the schoolhouse for a moment, with the afternoon sun on her face, and thought about what had just happened, and what it meant, and what it said about the nature of places, how they absorb a person slowly. Good leather absorbs oil, until the separation between the person and the place is no longer entirely clean. She went back into Iris Callum that her stitching expectations were in fact entirely reasonable, and she would meet all of them. Iris looked satisfied. I knew you would, she said. I knew it from the letter. What letter? The one you wrote to Tom Garrett, Iris said. He told me what you said. About the truth being in the records. About it not bending. She looked at Abigail with the direct, assessing quality of a woman who has survived a decade of sheep farming alone and has developed an extremely accurate gauge for what is real and what is performance. That's a woman who does what she says, she said. I told Tom so at the time. Nathan came down from the mountain on Thursday. He came, as he always came, at a time that was slightly earlier than he had told her, because he was not a man who was late to things he cared about. He tied the gray at Dunmore's and found her in the back room where she was doing the final work on Dora Fitch's coat. And he sat in the chair by the window, with the patience of a man who has learned that watching someone work carefully is its own kind of pleasure. Calloway spoke to me, he said, after a while. She kept her eyes on the seam. Yeah. About what? About the spring, Nathan said. There's a section of the lower easement channel that runs along the edge of his property. Yeah. He wants to know if I'd consider a shared maintenance agreement. He contributes labor 2 weeks a year. I agree to a formal access point for his irrigation. He asked you that. This morning, Nathan said. On the street. Took his hat off to do it. She looked at him. What did you say? I told him I'd think about it, Nathan said. And I think it's fair, he said. It's not forgiveness. It's just practical. She went back to the seam. That's the right word for it. He wanted to know. Nathan paused. He was doing the hat brim thing, except he wasn't holding his hat, so he was doing it with his thumb against his knee, which was the same gesture in a different location. He wanted to know if you'd consider taking on his wife's alterations on a regular basis. Month to month, she set down the coat. She looked at Nathan. Eldon Calloway, she said, wants to offer me regular work. His wife does, Nathan said. He's the vehicle. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked back at her work. The rate would need to be agreed in advance, she said. And in writing. I told him that, Nathan said. She raised an eyebrow. You negotiated on my behalf? I mentioned a condition, he said. Difference. I reckon, he said. Nair. She looked at him. He was watching her with the open, careful attention that was his version of happiness not performed, not announced, it present in everything, about the way he held himself when she was in the room. Nathan, she said, yes. I want to talk about the mountain. He was very still. Specifically, she said, about the second room. A pause. What about it? He said. The second room has a window that faces south, she said. And the bolt works well because you oiled it. And the quilt is blue and the table doesn't wobble. She looked at him. But it's 30 feet from the main room, and I've been thinking that 30 feet is a considerable distance. The room was very quiet. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He said carefully, a considerable distance. I'm not a woman who moves quickly on important things, she said. I want that understood. I know, he said. I'm also not a woman who mistakes practicality for indifference, she said. Or caution for disinterest. I know that too. What I'm saying, she said, is that I'd like the arrangement to change. In time, at a pace that's right, she held his gaze. I'd like to stop sleeping feet away from the person I think about most. Nathan Cole set his hands on his knees and looked at the woman across the room. From him, this woman who had arrived at his door with her spine straight and her coin picked back up, and her refusal to be made small by anyone's opinion of her, and something in his face that had been carefully maintained for 11 years came fully and finally down. "All right," he said. 2 words. He meant all of them. Nin. She picked up the coat and went back to the seam, and he sat in the chair by the window, and the afternoon went on around them in the particular way it does when something has been decided that will not be undecided. The winter came early that year to the Colorado Territory. The first snow hit the mountain in mid-October, earlier than Nathan had seen it in several years. And it came fast and hard, and blanketed the upper pasture overnight, so that when Abigail looked out the south window in the early morning, it was a world that had been entirely rearranged while she slept. She stood at the window with her coffee and looked at it. Nathan came up behind her. He had been awake before her, as he always was. He handed her a second cup better than adequate. She had been working on it with him, and the results were improving, and stood beside her at the window. "Early," he said. "Yes," she said. "The north pasture fence held," he said. "I checked at first light." "Of course it did," she said. "We built it right." He looked at her sideways. She looked at the snow. Somewhere in the pine line below, the mountain was making its winter sound, settling, tightening, adjusting to the weight and cold, and above them the sky was the particular flat white of a day that intends to keep snowing. "I want to ask you something," he said. She turned. He was facing her now, not the window, and he had the expression he had when he was organizing words that mattered and wanted to get the order right. "I asked you last summer to come to this mountain," he said. "I asked you for a practical reason, in practical terms, because that was the only language I had for it at the time." Waited. "I have better language now," he said. "I've been working on it. I noticed," she said. "I want to ask you to stay," he said. "Not because it's practical. Not because you're useful, though you are. Not because Price's men won't bother you up here." He paused. "Because this is where I want you to be. Because you made this place something it hasn't been in 11 years. "What did I make it?" she said. "A home," he said, "instead of just a place I live." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow came down steadily and covered the valley below until Silver Creek was small and white and barely visible, and the mountain held them both in its winter silence as if it had been built precisely for this purpose. "Nathan," she said. "Yes, I came to this territory with $17 and a name nobody respected," she said. "They had nowhere to go and no one waiting, and I was so tired of starting over that I could barely carry the suitcase." She held his gaze. "And then a man I didn't know held a door open, and then the same man drove a wagon up a mountain track at exactly 7 o'clock because that's the kind of man he is." She paused. "And then I found a wooden box full of 11 years of careful, honest work, and I thought, this is a man who does things right even when no one is watching. This is a man worth staying for." He looked at her with the open, unguarded face that was his most honest self. "Then stay," he said. "I already am," she said. He reached out and took her hand the way he had taken it at Rose's kitchen table, fully, deliberate, warmth of his palm against her knuckles, and she held on the way she always held on, without qualification. Outside, the snow kept falling. The fence held. The water ran clean through the channel to the valley below, the same way it had run for 11 years, steady and faithful and utterly indifferent to everything anyone had tried to do to stop it. They married in the spring. Not in a church, because Nathan was not a church man, and not with half of Silver Creek watching, because neither of them needed an audience for the things that mattered most. They married with a circuit judge named Aldous Webb, who came through the territory every 6 weeks and who performed the ceremony on the front porch of the cabin on a morning in April when the mountain was coming back to life around them. Rosa was there. Louisa Marsh was there, with Deputy Marsh beside her, who had turned out to be a quiet, decent man who looked at his wife the way a person looks at someone they understand they do not deserve and are grateful for anyway. Iris Callum came on horseback, and brought 2 bottles of something she'd been saving since the previous Christmas. Dr. Henney came, and Gerald Pitt from the land office, and a few of the lower valley landowners whose water ran clean because a man on a mountain had maintained a channel for 11 years. William Dern sent a letter from Denver. Clara Voss sent a gift, a sewing scissors, Sheffield steel, the finest Abigail had ever held. Eldon Calloway did not come. He had not been invited, and he understood why. And he sent a note with his wife that said only, "Yeah, I reckon that's fair," which was the most honest thing Abigail had ever seen him write. Nathan stood on the front porch of his cabin in his cleanest shirt. She had made him a new one, deep blue. Because she was a seamstress and she had opinions about what he wore with his hat in his hands, and his expression arranged into the careful stillness he used when something was very large, and he was managing it with respect. When the judge asked him if he would have this woman, Nathan Cole looked at Abigail Turner, who was standing in the morning sun in a dress the color of the first green that comes back to the mountain of winter, who had her chin up and her hands steady and her eyes on his, and he said, without hesitation and without performance, with the plain directness of a man who has finally found the right word after a very long search, "Yes, sir, I will." And Abigail, who had not cried once through all of it, not when Calloway laughed, not when Mrs. Hatch turned her away, not when Price's men walked beside her on the street, not when the diagnosis came back on Nathan's chest, not when she read Dern's letter with shaking hands at 7 in the morning, felt something come apart very quietly inside her chest. Not breaking, the opposite of breaking. The way a knot comes apart when it's finally safe to let it, when the thing it was holding together no longer needs to be held that way. Yes, the mountain received it. Rosa cried without apology. Louisa squeezed her husband's arm. Iris Callum opened one of the Christmas bottles and did not wait for anyone to ask. And Nathan Cole put his hat on and took his hand and looked out at the valley below at Silver Creek, small and distant and entirely manageable from up here, and he thought about a wooden box under a bed and 11 years of careful records. A woman who had come to that box, not as a stranger reading someone's history, but as a person who had looked at the history and understood exactly what it meant about the man who had kept it. He thought about what it meant to be seen, not the idea of it. The actual thing. The specific experience of another human being looking at the whole of you, the losses, the records, the fresh flowers on the grave, coffee that needed improvement, hands that knew how to fix things but hadn't known, for a long time, what to fix them for, and deciding with full information to stay. He had spent 11 years believing that he was the kind of person the world was better without. That the mountain was where he belonged, because the mountain didn't need anything from him, and he didn't need to risk giving anything to the mountain. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about it from the moment a woman set a coin on a counter with steady hands and picked it back up without flinching. And a door had been standing in the way of her leaving, and his body had moved through it before his mind had a chance to ask whether it was wise. The best things he had ever done had happened that way. The mountain held them in the April morning, patient and enormous, and entirely at peace, with the smith of what was happening on its shoulder, which was not small at all, which the mountain received with the same steady attention it gave to everything, the seasons, the water, the long work of things growing back after they had been taken down to the root. Some things, it turns out, cannot be claimed by fraud or fear or the weight of other people's opinions. Some things simply are what they are, documented in the careful handwriting of a man who did his work right when no one was watching, held safe in a wooden box. Nay, waiting for the day someone would sit down with them and know them for what they were worth. The truth, it turns out, does not need to be invented. It only needs someone willing to carry it into the light, set it on the table, and refuse to let it be taken back. That is what Abigail Turner did. That is what Nathan Cole had always known how to do, alone on his mountain, in the long years before she arrived. Together they were the kind of people that a place is lucky to hold. The kind that do not take what isn't theirs. The kind that cut flowers for graves and oil bolts, So they don't make sound and drive wagons at exactly 7 o'clock because they said they would. Kind that, once they have decided to stay, stay. Silver Creek, Colorado learned that. Slowly, imperfectly. The way that places learn things not through a single revelation, but through the accumulation of small ordinary evidence, repeated over time, until the truth of it was simply part of the landscape, as permanent and inarguable as the mountain above the valley. And on that mountain, the lamp burned every night, and the water ran clean every season. And a woman who had arrived with nothing built, on the shoulder of a Colorado mountain, in the company of a man who had forgotten he deserved one, exactly the life she had been carrying the shape of for years, patient, careful, real. Home is not a place you find. Home is the person who opens the door, and means it, and is still there in the morning. Nathan Cole opened the door. Abigail Turner walked through it, and neither of them ever looked back.